Well, ladies and gentlemen, here we go. We're starting with the stream. For those of you who are just listening in, this is the Canadian Commie, where we comment on the downward spiral that Western civilization finds itself in. If you would like to participate in the YouTube stream that I'm currently doing right now, you can head over to thecanadiancommie.com. You can comment. I read those comments. I respond to those comments. We have a nice little community going on as we are all collectively, all as one, all together, dealing with the decline of Western civilization and what that means for us, what that means for the world, what that means for everything, and what we can do about it. I'm getting started a little bit early today, so my assumption is it's going to take people a little bit longer to come on into the chat, as is normally the case. When I get started just a few minutes early. Today's stream is going to be, the theme of today's stream is Watch the West Cope. That there are waves that happen, right? Waves of despair, waves of recognition, waves of realization, waves of waves where the empire and the people within it think to themselves, something's going desperately wrong. We had one such wave when it was Biden versus Trump version 2 Electric Boogaloo, right? Like when that was happening, there was this sense amongst the populace, something's gone horribly wrong. Now that Biden's gone down and Kamala's here, Mama Kamala, when the coconut heads are losing their minds, with Daddy Tim Walz, the Democrats are back on the everything's great, and the copium is striking, and we're going to see a lot of that copium today. I've got some really great articles. Secrets, good to see you. Need some CC. I don't know what that means. Need some CC. Good to see you, though, my man. Hail Toast is over on Twitch. Iran is planning to deter Israel. I hope they deter them very, very hard. Yeah. I don't really have concrete stuff to tell you about the Israel situation, but we can talk about it. His Secret says, oh, Canadian Commie. Yes, of course. I should have put that together. Of course, secrets. See, you just like to keep your secrets. That's what it is. Austin, how are you doing? How's it going? I'll be on in a bit. Going to finish my chapter on anti-during. Very good. Good to see you. Eggs D. Yeah, shit's getting fucking manic. You bet it is, my man. Yep. It's going to get, like hysterical. There's going to be a hysteria that happens, and like, what are all of these coconut heads going to do 2 years into the Kamala Harris term and recognize, nothing she said is coming true. Like, she's just a fraudulent liar like the rest of them, right? They're totally full of shit like the rest of them. That 0.2% increase over 15 years to that one issue. Was that worth it? CH writes, Biden is a more obvious genocidal maniac, but Vance and Walz are still genocidal maniacs. Listen carefully. You don't need to listen carefully. They'll say it explicitly. They're Zionists. They're pro-Zionist. XD writes, what's with the coconut reference for Kamala? Is it because she's black on the outside, white on the inside? No. It is one of the more famous prominent quotes that came out at the beginning of Kamala Harris's tenure as the presidential candidate, rather, was, what do you think's going on? You didn't just drop out of the coconut tree. She said, to be fair to her, because it sounds odd if you just say the quote by itself, she said her mother used to say, right? Her mother used to say, what's going on in your head? You didn't just drop out of the coconut tree. You're part of everything that's come before you and part of the line of history. And it was actually kind of a good point that she was making, which is why I think it really grabbed hold. She was basically affirming something that a lot of leftists say, which is like, you aren't just a hyper individual, right? You don't just spawn into reality and then reality spawned in the moment you spawned in, and then there's a bunch of NPCs like Jordan Peterson wants you to believe, right? You actually exist within, like, the past. There's a passing of time. There's a history. There's something going on before you. But it's this phrase, you didn't just drop from the coconut tree. that really has grabbed hold. And the pro-Kamala crowd, you'll see it everywhere. They'll put coconuts and coconut trees in everything, right? And so they're coconut heads, right? They take a little coconut shell and they put it on their head, and they're just like, I like Kamala, right? And they just stop thinking, and the coconut shell is there to block all thought, and we're just supposed to go along with it. Yeah, ignore the Palestinians, right? I'm speaking. To be fair to Kamala on this, she has backed off of this. So the moment where there were Palestinian protesters, and she said, if you want Donald Trump to win, you keep saying that, but I'm speaking. And then her audience lost their minds, right? Well, she has since backed down from that position of let's ignore the Palestinians, I'm speaking, which was very obviously a dumbass thing to say, and has now actually called for a ceasefire, which she's done before. It's not a new position for her. I think that if you think that this is real, you're a dumbass. Kamala is obviously blowing smoke up your ass. She can call for a ceasefire all she wants. They're not going to do that because she's not going to actually be in control of anything, right? The military-industrial complex is in control of that situation. They might listen to her as she says, I think that we should do a ceasefire, and then they'll go, okay, we'll take that under advisement, and then they'll do whatever it is they think that they're doing as they actively move forward towards total failure, which is the position of the American empire at this point. They don't know what else to do. Omnicidal Tendency says Iran is fucked, LOL. I don't see any evidence for that. Iran has been in a defensive military position for decades now, for long time. They're not going to give up and their position globally on the world stage has only gotten stronger over those last decades. Their ties to Russia, their ties to China have only gotten stronger. So the idea that Iran is the one that's in the crisis position, like Israel is obviously the one that's in the crisis position. Like Israel is the one that is facing a lot of outward external pressure. The genocide has absolutely ramped up the pressure against Israel. You've got the Houthis acting as blockades. You've got Hezbollah. You've got Jordan, Syria, Iran itself, obviously. Even Saudi Arabia getting into the mix in small-scale ways. And, of course, Russia and China have been explicitly outspoken about saying that the genocide that's occurring in Israel is unacceptable. Moreover, from a military position, from a grand military standpoint, Israel stands in the way of China's objectives in the Middle East and Africa. That Israel is this wedge that exists between the Middle East and Africa, and China would prefer it if it wasn't there. So I don't really see, like, Iran has been, of course, experiencing, like, terrorism and has been experiencing assassinations from the West and all of this, sure, but that's not the defining characteristic of what's going on in that conflict. Like, I think Israel is in a very serious position. I think the position that Israel is finding itself in is very, very serious, and should not be taken lightly. If the Israelis are not careful, right, they're going to let these Zionists absolutely destroy them. And that's happened in the past, right? That's happened in the past. You just need to read the Old Testament. You just need to read the prophets of the Old Testament. Woe be to Israel, right? You just need to read these guys and be like, yeah, you guys came into the region, took over that area, alienated everybody around you, and they came in and they wiped you out, right? It's happened before. It can happen again. And I don't see any evidence that shows me that Iran is the one that's on the back foot here. It is absolutely Israel that's on the back foot. It is absolutely Israel that is in the crisis position. And if you could provide any evidence for this statement that says Iran is the one that's in trouble, I'll gladly look at it, but it's just not what I'm seeing. And, like, one guy getting assassinated at some point is not really, like, a serious military threat. CH writes, Iran is a great civilization and America isn't. USA, Ukraine, Israel, all doomed states like Nazi Germany or Imperial Japan. CH writes, it's a goofy expression. This is in in response to the coconut tree. See Maya Rudolpho impression for Kamala for its full range of implications. Can we just appoint Maya Rudolpho instead? Well, I keep saying Rudolpho. It's Maya Rudolph. Comedians are smarter than politicians as a rule. Zelensky is a comedian. Cotton, good to see you. Just me, good to see you guys. Fiddleford, good to see you guys. Omnicidal tendencies continues. LM fighter jets not being detected by air defense systems and airstriking people. Iran got half its navy wiped out by the U.S., and they want to take on Israel, that and Jordan and Saudi Arabia. I mean, when did Iran have half of its navy wiped out by the U.S.? Like, Iran is not like a major naval power. Like, if it had 2 boats and you sank 1 boat, then yeah, you've sunk half the naval fleet. Like, Iran has been undergoing a siege. That's really what it is. They've been surrounded by the United States and they've been under siege for 20, 30 years now. Like, so I would say that Iran has been doing actually very fabulously under those circumstances. Like, if the United States, like, the United States has stated explicitly, you can just listen to Wesley Clark talk about this, that they wanted to destroy Iran. Just like they destroyed Iraq, just like they destroyed Afghanistan, right? They want to overthrow Iran and they want to destroy it. Well, they haven't done it. And if they could do it, they would do it, but they can't. And why can't they? Because the internal leadership and the internal structures of Iran are more agile and are more capable. ZH, good to see you. What's your thought on Midwestern Marks and ACP? Like, wow, didn't expect that. Glad you never went on there. Specifically Midwestern Marks, I think that he is a well-meaning, well-intentioned young man. People continuously accuse him of being a Fed, just like CH did here. I have not seen the evidence for that. He has responded to those allegations and been like, that's absurd. Like, where is your evidence? And we here at the Canadian Commie base our opinions on evidence. So if there is evidence, I'd like to see it. And until I see such evidence, then my opinion of him, I think, is the right one, which is that he's a well-meaning, well-intentioned young man who understands that what is happening in his country does have solutions. Those solutions were articulated by Marx, that the analysis by Marxism is correct. But he still carries with him the inherent bigotries and the inherent biases and the privileges that of his upbringing and where he was born. He is a straight white man from the Midwest. I think he's from Ohio, if I'm not mistaken, right? And that's going to give him that kind of perspective. And the Just Me asks what he do. Well, this is the criticism of what's becoming the American Communist Party. That includes people like Jackson Hinkle, that includes people like Has, which I think more or less follow this exact same critique, which is that they really want their cake and they want to eat it too. They basically want the entire power structure, not the power structure, they want people, they want citizens to essentially grant them power and authority without actually doing anything in order to garner the respect or authority or the right to rule, right? The right to govern. They will outright say, we should ignore women's issues, we should ignore LGBT issues, we should ignore minority issues. Workers' issues are the only issue that matter. Well, that's a failed idea from the outset. You literally can't build a coalition that way. You literally can't build a coalition that way. And Has, for example, and it's being pointed out that Has was voted the president of the American Communist Party. He's explicitly said and written things that are huge red flags, should be considered massive, enormous red flags. His call to read the works of Carl Schmitt, for example. Carl Schmitt being a Nazi that worked in the Nazi Party and never recanted his Nazism. He lived and died as a Nazi. He was a lawyer in the Nazi Party, who wrote a book called or not a book really, it was like a small document called The Theory of the Partisan. This is what Has says that we should hearken to, that we should all be partisans like Carl Schmitt tells us to. And what's kind of funny about that is that it's utterly unnecessary. Like, just read Lenin. Like, read Mao. You want to be a partisan, like, read Trotsky even, right? Like, what are you doing? Talking about a Nazi like Carl Schmitt. Like, it's just the most embarrassing kind of stuff. And nobody seems to be pointing it out to him, saying, like, hey, that's extraordinarily bad optics. Like, it's an extremely bad idea, especially for a group of people who call themselves patriotic socialists, which is like a hair's breadth away from calling yourself a national socialist. Secrets writes, John, do you want help making shorts and editing clips of your videos? I mean, yeah. I'm just one guy, right? I'm just a dude, and I work a full-time job on top of this, right? Like, I literally do this because I would go insane otherwise. Sorry, guys. Technical difficulty on my end. I need to do something about this. Okay. Yeah, reach out via email, Secrets. That'd be great. And, like, I'm down for whatever, man. I'm down to clown. So, I think that Has, Hinkle, and Eddie are all well-meaning. I haven't seen any evidence to show me that they're like feds or in the pocket of anybody, right? Like, if you have any evidence, right? If you have any evidence for that, please send it my way because I would gladly look at it. But more or less, I just think they're young dudes. That's all. And, like, of course their position is, let's ignore all of the other issues except the issues that matter to us. Right? It's, like, common for straight white men to do that, and for straight men to do that. Just like, oh, my issues are universal issues. Your issues can be pushed aside. It's like, yeah, not really, bro. Like, not really. And moreover, I think it just kind of shows the... I think it kind of shows the their immaturity. That's all. I think it really shows their immaturity and their inability to be like, oh yeah, you know, because fundamentally, this is what it is. I don't want to talk too much longer on this because I feel like I have talked about this a lot. Fundamentally, these mega communist guys believe that straight white male, or straight male if you prefer, because technically Haas is of non-white descent, but whiteness is like a structure, it's not a skin color, it doesn't matter. They believe that they are the default. That's really what it comes down to. You can just read Haas's writings to see that that's the truth. That even though it's very obtuse and very intentionally dense and stupid, frankly, he does explicitly say that being a man makes you the default position. that the state is a reflection of the people, and he explicitly states that like indigenous trans women are not reflected in the state. So who is? Oh, men, right? Because men are the only thing that matter in Haas's worldview. Because even though you grab hold of Marxism and you can see the dynamic of the workers' struggle and the struggle of the proletariat, right? It doesn't suddenly miraculously make you not a bigot, right? And so my criticism of these MAGA communists is that they don't take the historical material dialectic and turn it on themselves and then deconstruct their own worldview. Like, that to me explains all of their behavior. Like, Midwestern Marx is just like a nice, good old boy, really. And but he's not immune to it, right? And Jackson Hinkle is like just a brash young man who has had like political attachment. Like woke CIA drone pilot over on Twitch says it's not a smoking gun, but Hinkle being on Nancy Pelosi's youth council, close with military psyop lady Tulsi Gabbard, kind of suggests that he's an op. I mean, I don't know. It's not enough. Honestly, like it's not enough to say that when I was 12, I was in some political organization, you know. Like again, what's more believable to me that a group of young men are coming together under Marxist principles and are acting exactly the way you would expect young men to act, right? Like, are we shocked by any of this? Is any of this shocking? Is it shocking at all that a group of young men would say, stop talking about the issues that matter to you? Start talking about the issues that matter to me. My issues are universal. Your issues are superfluous, right? No, I think that's the most normal thing ever, right? And it's a more mature, more advanced position to say, oh wait, male is not default. Male is just one position of many positions that exist in our reality, right? And that's a more mature way of looking at things. And I just think that we shouldn't be blown away at all that these guys kind of have that immaturity. What is concerning is that they are enshrining that immaturity in their documents, and they're enshrining that like philosophically, when it's so obviously them just basically being men and women. Men are default. Men are superior to women. Women need to be silent on women's issues, and we all just need to gather under the issues that matter to men, which are the universal issues, which are workers' issues, which is how they define it, as if women don't also have concerns and issues as workers that men don't have, right? As if, and I'll give you like a clearest example ever, right? Women menstruate. There you go. There's a woman's issue, right? That these guys are just like not mature enough to deal with. Like a real simple position. Like if you wanted to garner support amongst a base of women, a real simple position to hold on to would be, hey, when women are menstruating, they shouldn't have to work. That's all. ZH writes, the Fed stuff is a fake out. It's a private, well-funded group called LaRouche, whose stated mission is to infiltrate the left, and who has Jackson and Caleb Maupin all work with. Oh, interesting. LaRouche. Is it this, the LaRouche organization? Is this what I'm looking at? Is this the organization that you're talking about? Right here? Yes? Okay, I'll look into that. Anyway, so long story short, someone's writing over on Twitch, Schiller Institute too. Schiller Institute. This right here, this is what we're looking at. The International Schiller Institute? It's always going to be somebody, guys. Right? Like, it's always going to be somebody. There's always going to be somebody behind the scenes funding somebody. That's always the way it's going to be. Right? So they work with Hinkle. Okay, cool. I'll look into them too. But I don't know, guys. Like, I just think that we're looking at young men who are acting exactly the way you should expect young men to act. That's all. And, like, do I wish that they would grow up? Sure. Right? Sure. Am I holding my breath? Nah. Because the hard reality is that you can't build a coalition of people while saying we're going to actively ignore your issues, and by the way, read this Nazi. Right? Yeah, they're young enough. They're young enough. Like, just because they are now becoming 30 doesn't mean anything to me. Like, they're young enough. Like, especially if there is literally nobody around them actually saying, like, hey, maybe we should actually challenge ourselves on this particular position. Because it's sort of doomed from the outset, right? Like, you think the Russian communists had a successful revolution because they said, let's ignore what women are going through? You think there weren't women's rights groups? You think there weren't groups of women that existed in the Soviet Union? You think that there weren't minority rights groups existing in the Soviet Union, right? You think that during the Chinese Revolution, Mao was walking around saying, let's ignore what women think and pay no attention to women's issues, right? So it's this sort of latent bigotry, this like misogyny that comes out of existing in these cultures that I think has really colored their worldview, and they need to get over it, right? They just need to get over it. Just Me writes, did you see the Beaverton letter to Meta? I did not. Okay, I'm going to move on from this to... Here's an article from the New York Times. This is a guest essay, an opinion article. Putin has victory in his grasp. On July 9th, as the world stared at the blood-spattered rubble of a children's hospital in Kiev, Russia celebrated its rotating presidency of the United Nations Security Council with a lunch in New York. On the menu was chicken Kiev, a popular Russian dish of thin pounded cutlet filled with garlic butter. Before tucking in, the lunch's host and Russia's permanent representative to the United Nations, Vasily Nebenzia, denied Russia's responsibility for the bombing that killed 2 people and wounded 7 children. If the diplomats choked on their chicken, they did so quietly. The incident is a perfect summation of the world we live in now. As the West marches on, seemingly impotent, Russia grows ever bolder, like a bully who realizes the teacher isn't coming. Russians' fear of NATO, palpable at the start of the invasion, is now tempered by the impunity their leader enjoys no matter the atrocities committed on his watch. Why be afraid? Despite having the resources to end this war on Ukraine's terms, the West clearly lacks the will to win. For Vladimir Putin, victory is now firmly within reach, irrespective of who is in the White House next year. In the past 2.5 years, Western leaders have reiterated that they will stand with Ukraine. Yet despite saying the right words, those leaders continue to treat the war as a localized conflict in which they have few obligations. Promised military aid arrives late and in insufficient quantities to match Russia's resources. And restrictions, like those against targeting military assets in Russia itself, limit the aid's effectiveness. The recent Ukrainian advance into Russian territory shows what could be possible if the shackles were lifted. But the West is wedded to its too little too late approach, justified by the risk of provoking nuclear escalation from Russia. Ukraine's application to join NATO is a moot point for the same reason. Nor has the West managed to cut off the sources of Russia's economic might, despite rounds of sanctions. The economy is growing healthily, and the assets of Russian oligarchs remain safe in the West, even if frozen. Most important, Russian oil is being bought and sold with minimal difficulty around the world, as Western leaders can't seem to decide what they want more, to meaningfully punish Russia or keep things as they are. Tellingly, the U.S. Treasury's proposal to impose penalties on tankers that help Russian oil evade sanctions has stalled over the White House's fear that higher gasoline prices won't play well at the polls in November. One person not worried about the American election is Mr. Putin. Unlike the equivocal West, Mr. Putin is playing seriously. He has put his country and his economy on a war footing, dedicating at least a third of the state budget to the military and enticing tens of thousands of Russians to join his war machine with generous salaries and payouts. He has expanded the theater into NATO's territory, financing pro-Russian parties and politicians, spreading misinformation, and directly targeting Western individuals involved in sending weapons to Ukraine. When confronted, Russia simply shrugs off the evidence. This setup, an adversary with the will and resources to fight to the end and allies that deliver just enough aid to stop the front from collapsing tomorrow, leaves Ukraine in a bleak place. At a certain point, Ukrainian resolve, already tested to the limit, will wear thin, and a peace deal with Mr. Putin, on whatever terms, will become preferable to dying. This moment may come sooner if Donald Trump wins the American presidential elections and ends the war in 24 hours, as he has promised, by forcing Ukraine to negotiate on Mr. Putin's terms. Or it will come later if the Democrats keep the White House and continue their halfway house strategy. Mr. Putin is already planning for victory. His latest so-called peace proposal, in which Russia keeps occupied territory and Ukraine is banned from joining NATO, was dismissed as propaganda by many Western leaders. But it is, in fact, the most realistic scenario of how this war will pan out. Voices ranging from Kremlin supporters to Nobel laureates and even the Pope are advocating a peace that would give Mr. Putin what he wants. Ukraine has rejected the proposal, of course, but Russia, after pounding the country's infrastructure, people, and army, will almost certainly make it again. Eventually, anything that stops the bombs will be viewed as an improvement. Every war has winners and losers. If Mr. Putin wins this war, Ukraine and its allies by definition will have lost it. But defeat won't be distributed equally. A peace deal on Mr. Putin's term will be bad for Ukraine. It will lose nearly 20% of its territory and around 5 million people. But that loss will be mitigated by the remarkable thwarting of Mr. Putin's original plan to take over Kiev and destroy Ukraine as a nation. War will stop. There will be dead to mourn, wounded to heal, and a country to rebuild. Ukraine's reputation on the global stage will be higher than ever, and membership of the European Union will be in sight. The West, on the other hand, will be hard-pressed to find any positives. The failure of its leaders to prevent war in Europe or to successfully punish the aggressor will signal to others that borders are no longer inviolable. Frozen conflicts will unfreeze, and old grievances will resurface, with institutions like the United Nations simply recording the damage. Russia, backed by other openly anti-West states like Iran and North Korea, will be further emboldened. The next conflict may well occur on NATO soil. If nuclear saber-rattling proved enough to hold NATO in check in Ukraine, why wouldn't it work were Mr. Putin to invade a member of the alliance, such as Estonia? The European continent will no longer be safe. Ukraine and Europe won't be the biggest losers of this war, though. In any alliance, the brunt of responsibility is carried by its leader. By first casting its lot with Ukraine and then failing to follow through, America has lost its place as the bulwark of the West that can guarantee protection and peace to its allies. Last year, its hesitant, piecemeal approach for lending weapons undermined Ukraine's summer counteroffensive. This year, Its political dysfunction held up the critical aid and muddied Canadian American public opinion on the insurgency of helping Ukraine. In a matter crucial to the world's stability, America flunked the leadership test. Anyone subscribing to the idea of America's greatness will find this a hard pill to swallow. Depending on who's in power in Washington, this reputational disaster will either be downplayed as a regrettable necessity or celebrated as a triumph of isolationism. But even in the world of America first, you need seconds and thirds to have your back. Will Europe stand with America in its looming geopolitical standoff with China, now reinforced by the natural resources that Mr. Putin has mortgaged to President Xi? Will the Middle East be as obliging in matters of oil prices? Time will tell just how severe the security and economic consequences will be. But one thing is already clear. A small war far away from America's borders has reshaped our world and made America's place in it smaller. So glad to see that the New York Times is starting to actually catch up with us here at the Canadian Commie. We've been calling this for several years now. A lot of cope in this article. No real mention of like, hey, the United States could have absolutely done something about this. The United States could have absolutely like picked up the phone and been like, okay, we won't allow Ukraine to join NATO, right? We'll back our stuff out. We won't get involved in this conflict at all. Like that would have pumped the brakes on a lot of this, right? But that's not how the United States is. Yep. Joe Anthony writes of the article I just read, projection time. Yeah, weapons are leaking out of Ukraine like a sieve. Yeah, copying American playbook. Who did write this article? Good question. It's just listed as a guest essay at the bottom. Yeah. Looks like the person who wrote this article. Here you are. Anastasia Edel is the author of Russia, Putin's Playground, Empire Revolution, and the New Tsar. So that should tell you how unserious this person is. Russia, Putin's Playground, Empire Revolution, and the New Tsar. Yeah. Kind of an embarrassing thing to say, frankly. Yeah, I expected more BS in that article too, honestly. But the truth is that the United States is going to have to come to terms with the reality that it is losing this war, and it will lose this war. That unlike the other wars that it has lost in the past, in the recent past, against like Afghanistan, that's more of like a humiliation, right? An embarrassment on like a kind of a small scale. This is straight up like losing to Russia, right? And if you're one of these kind of Cold Warrior people, which seems to be the only voice that gets listened to in American politics at all, then you are, then this is going to be humiliation on the highest possible level. Donald, good to see you again, my friend. China is slowing down. Not really. Like, China has had to shift gears because the United States is doing everything it can to decouple itself. Like, the world is splitting in two, right? And the global south is beginning to recognize in big and significant ways that it can no longer stay coupled to this insane, ridiculous clown empire, right? The insane, ridiculous clown empire that writes absolutely ridiculous. Like, here's an article from the Wall Street Journal entitled, Marxism is a Mask for Xi Jinping's Power Over China. Subtitle, he would be helpless trying to explain to you a concept like dialectical materialism. Just baby-brained nonsense that, like, a child would write. The idea that this article got written and then it went to an editor's desk and then the editor read it and then said, yeah, that's good for print, like, could not be more embarrassing to say. And so, is it technically the case that the Chinese economy has slowed down? Sure, but everything is what's the word I'm looking for here? Everything is referential, right? Like, if China's economy goes down 5% and the United States economy goes down 30%, was there a slowdown? Sure. Donald continues. Well, China indeed is. After COVID, they had a significant growth. It's only expected to grow so little by this year and past year. There's no evidence of that, Donald. Every single time anybody looks at China's economy, they increase the amount. Like, the World Bank and the IMF, literally every single time they look at China, they're like, oh, they're actually growing faster than our expectations. So if you have any evidence to the contrary, I'll gladly look at it. But when I take a look at the world powers and their estimation of what's going on in China, China is going along much faster than everybody else. And that's by and large in part because China has a government that's actually trying to improve the quality of life and trying to improve the economic lot for its own citizens, as opposed to what goes on in the United States, which is we got to make Elon Musk a little bit richer. Yeah, and of course Donald says China stands 10 trillion behind America in economy. Yeah, because the fake dollars that you see on a screen, that's what matters. Certainly isn't assets, right? Certainly isn't infrastructure. Certainly isn't the quality of life for your own citizens, right? Like, none of that actually matters. What matters is the fake dollars that we put on a screen somewhere, right? This is the classic capitalist religious mind, right? I've said it over and over and over and over and over and over again, and I'm glad that you're bringing it up because it's worth talking about again and again, which is that capitalism is a religion, right? Capitalism is a religious ideology at this point. It has absolutely no basis in any scientific analysis anywhere, right? That the people who are doing a scientific analysis, the people who are doing a scientific analysis of capitalism are Marxists, right? And if these capitalists were also doing a scientific analysis of capitalism, then they also too would be Marxists. But they don't, right? And you, Donald, are following a religious line, right? And that religious line says that money worship matters more than assets, goods, quality of life, breathable air, workable land, right? Any of that kind of stuff. That it's fake money dollars that exist on the screen. That's the exclusively and only the only measurement that matters, right? Donald, I'm going to really ask you to stop stating things like you know what you're talking about. I've said this to you before, and I'm going to make it like straightforward for you. It's time for you to start asking questions. It's time for you to stop talking like you're intelligent or intellectual or actually literate, because you're not. Very plainly. Like, if you have a piece of information that you think is worth anything, maybe say like, hey, John, what do you think about this thing? Right? But every single time you come in here and you start talking as if you know something, it's very obvious that you don't. Right? And it's just kind of frustrating. It's just kind of frustrating to discuss with you. Because you want to be respected as an authority or an expert on the subject, and you're just not. Right? You're just not. So start asking questions. Change your mindset from, I'm sure this is correct, to a more inquisitive mindset. Right? Because I don't actually respect the way you're talking to me right now. Just straight up. And, like, if this is the way this is going to go, I'm just going to get rid of you. Because, like, I'm just not interested in discussing a subject with somebody who is actually illiterate, does not actually know anything about the subject, but pretends like they are literate. So, this is another article that I'd like to read. Marxism is a mask for Xi Jinping's power over China. Leon Aaron is right to see China's Xi Jinping is on a mission to change the world. Marxism and the Xi-Putin link, op-ed, August 1st, but misses the mark to see him as deep in Marxism. Mr. Xi's real education was only to junior high level. before schools in China were closed for Mao's Cultural Revolution. In the late 1970s, his Bachelor of Science in Chemical Engineering came out of a hollow program for politically favored people, and his 1998 to 2002 doctorate in Marxism was written by his staff, source required. Mr. Xi would be helpless trying to explain to you a concept like dialectical materialism. This article is already like extremely embarrassing. Oh, it's literally 3 paragraphs long. That's how embarrassing this is. This comes out of Princeton University. This is a emerite professor Perry Link writing out of Princeton University. Shows you how embarrassing Princeton is. There is no question that he is smart. He has a superb grasp of the techniques of infighting in a communist system. He has macadated his way to the top, where even though he is widely disliked within the party, source required, he controls the levers that keep him in place. Yeah, how do you think he got there, my man? This really is embarrassing. Like, this is really embarrassing. That like a professor from the University of Princeton, from Princeton University, would write an article this stupid. Like, this is just stupid. His dressing of himself in Marxism is a tool. It is a claim to intellectual heritage that he makes to enhance his prestige and hence his power. Like, nobody... So it's important for him to wear Marxism as a trapping, but nobody can challenge him on it because he's too stupid to understand anything about it. Like, do you understand how... Do you see how stupid that sounds? Right? Do you hear how dumb that is? Right? This guy clearly doesn't. This is one of these educated dimwits that we talk a lot about on the channel. Its utter emptiness is evident when you see it side by side with his parallel claim to inherit Confucius, father of the ancient culture of the motherland. What do these very different thinkers, Marx and Confucius, have in common? For Mr. Xi, it is only that they are useful masks behind which to plot political power. So the only evidence that this well-educated dimwit is willing to put in front of us for that Xi Jinping is A, disliked within his own party, even though for some reason he's the president of the party, and then is that Xi Jinping is illiterate on the subject of Marxism, is that Xi Jinping also talks about Confucius. You know, one of the seminal philosophers and one of the major thinkers in China. Right? Like, that would be as dumb as me saying Kamala Harris doesn't know anything about Harry Potter because she talks about George Washington. Right? It's just a stupid thing to say. And this is what passes for education in America. Just these well-educated... And you got to remember, guys like this professor, Perry Link from Princeton University, are teaching children. Right? This is a person that our society has actually said out loud in front of everybody, this guy should be teaching our children things. And in 3 paragraphs, he's discredited himself as an intellectual. He's deeply stupid, deeply incompetent, ridiculous, just childishly ridiculous. And this person is teaching your kids. If you send your kids to Princeton, this is the quality of education they're going to end up with. It's naked. There it is. 1 + 1 = 2. The decline of the West is so self-evident. It's so apparent to anybody who isn't just completely coconut pilled, who isn't just like Make America Great Again pilled, who's just standing here being like, wait a minute, if we zoom our perspective out like 0.5%, if we just go like a little bit further out and take a look at like, who are we? Where do we stand in the world? What do other nations think of us? How do we think? Right? The moment you do that, you see pretty much how clownish this is. It's just cartoonish. And anybody can do this. Like, anybody can see the reality of the decline of the West as naked as they possibly can. As long as you just stop viewing America as this like God-given holy country of the highest order. Yeah, Joe Anthony writes, educated fools. I have a cousin like this, so it's a hit piece. Yeah. Yeah, China is more based on Confucianism than Marxism. I mean, China is a 4,000-year-old civilization. The idea that it wouldn't refer to its own historical... And I mean, for goodness sakes, they call it socialism with Chinese characteristics. Like, I've seen Western Marxists critique China for this, for pointing out that, yeah, China's a 4,000-year-old civilization, right? And I'm like, why should they not talk about that? I don't understand why they shouldn't bring that to the fore. Like, why is this something that suddenly discredits... Like, why is discrediting... Why is discussing your own history suddenly discredit you as a thinker? Well, moving on. On to more cope. Now we're getting into the internal domestics of the absolute cope of what's coming out of our own society and our own quote unquote educated intellectuals, right? As if there is an intellectual left in America. 59% of Americans wrongly think the United States is in a recession, right? Because if the only thing you measure is how much money Elon Musk made yesterday, then, you know, oh, how could it possibly be a recession? Look how much money that we're extracting from the population, right? Like, if that's how you measure success, right? Well, GDP growth went up, and all of that GDP growth went to one person. Well, what are people complaining about, right? So this detached aloofness, this inability to actually understand. And people like this Jessica Dickler from CNBC, right? They are in the positions that they are in because they are professional dimwits. They are paid to be unintellectual. They are paid to not understand what's going on. And if they did understand what was going on and insisted upon saying, like, hey, when you've got huge sections of your society that are living paycheck to paycheck, you know, the majority of Americans living paycheck to paycheck, with a minimum wage that hasn't gone up in 50 years, with a stagnating wage base, right? When you've got all of that going on, and then you turn around and say everything's economically fine, it instills a lot of resentment in people, right? If you start talking about that, well, you no longer work at CNBC, right? You're not gonna stay there if you talk this way. So 59% of Americans wrongly, says CNBC. Let's read this article. This is going to be great. Yep. The U.S. economy has remained remarkably strong, even amid persistent inflation and high interest rates. Let's see how they define strength. Let's see what is their how do they categorize strength? What's economic strength mean to Jessica Dickler? And yet, 59% of Americans falsely believe the U.S. is currently in a recession, according to the recent survey of 2,000 adults by a firm in June. Citing higher costs and difficulty making ends meet, most respondents said they think a recession started roughly 15 months ago, in March 2023, and could last until July 2025, a firm found. Yeah, don't believe your eyes. Don't believe your experience. Don't believe your paycheck. Don't see that your wage hasn't gone up in 50 years. Don't see that prices have tripled. Don't see that your rent is constantly going up. Don't pay any attention to, you know, reality, facts, evidence, the experience of your life. Hey, you know, Donald, my man, I'm good to say bye to you. Let's put you on timeout. We'll do that for 24 hours. Try to fit in, bud. We are not in a recession. Right now, we have a Goldilocks economy, said Gene Goldman, Chief Investment Officer at Cetera Financial Group in El Segundo, California. The country's economy has continued to expand since the COVID-19 pandemic, sidestepping early recessionary forecasts. Officially, the National Bureau of Economic Research defines a recession as a significant decline in economic activity that is spread across the economy and lasts more than a few months, as long as it only affects Elon Musk. The last time that happened was in the early 2020, when the economy came to an abrupt halt because of COVID. In the last century, there have been more than a dozen recessions, some lasting as long as a year and a half. So, here the article is just telling you that capitalism fails once every 10 years. Once every decade, the country falls into a recession, right? This time, though, it isn't a recession because we say so. So let's see what their indicator is for why is the economy not in a recession, even though people are struggling to pay their bills. Still, regardless of the country's economic standing, many Americans are struggling in the face of sky-high prices for everyday items, and most have exhausted their savings and are now leaning on credit cards to make ends meet. Money is top of mind, said Vishal Kapoor, Senior Vice President of Product at a firm. Consumers are resilient, but they're feeling the pinch of higher prices. Economists have wrestled with the growing disconnect between how the economy is doing and how people feel about their financial standing. Yeah, I'm sure economists are wrestling with that, given that they are detached, aloof, and clueless, right? Given that they are paid to be stupid. Like, it really reminds me of, what was his name? There was a Nobel laureate, Angus something or other, who essentially called out his entire profession for this. That basically just said, look, we're just disconnected from reality. We're just looking at spreadsheets and we're not actually paying any attention to what's going on in people's actual lives. And then when you turn around and actually look at people's actual lives and see that 60% of them are saying, yeah, we're definitely in a recession, you go, no, technically, according to this spreadsheet that I have, we're not technically, I say, so because Warren Buffett made a lot of money yesterday. No wonder you're the most hated profession in America, because you guys are illiterate boobs. You're stupid. Like, if I see on someone's resume, I'm an economist at some university, I immediately go, oh, so you're stupid. You're the dumbest person I've ever spoken to in my life, right? I think that you're less credible than a janitor. I think that you have less credibility than the guy flipping burgers at a McDonald's. It blows me away that economist is somehow considered, oh, well, he's an economist. Oh, he's an economist. He's paid to lie on behalf of the capitalist class. Well, like, there are two professions that if I find out that you're involved in, I will turn around and walk away. I don't want you to be my friend. I don't want to know who you are. Number one, cop. Number two, economist. Unless you follow up economist by saying, oh, Marxist, by the way. Then I'm like, oh, you're literate. Oh, you understand basic facts and like 1 + 1 = 2. Oh. We're in a vibe session. So here's where the childishness comes in. Here's where these economists really realize and like reveal to you their childishness and how they never grew up. All they've ever done is taken money from rich people to basically tell you what the rich people want you to think. Right? And then put like fancy figures and like numbers on it to be like, yeah, what the rich people said was true, it turned out. Thank you for my money. We're in a vibe session. Joyce Chang, J.P. Morgan's chair of global research, so just a dimwit paid to be stupid, right? Said at the CNBC Financial Advisor Summit in May. Over the last few years, the wealth creation was concentrated amongst homeowners and upper income brackets, Chang said, but you probably have about 1/3 of the population that's been left out of that. That's why there's such a disconnect. So here they are just explicitly stating we've abandoned 1/3 of the populace, right? But hold on, 60% of people said that the economy was in a recession. That's twice as much as 1/3. Rising rents coupled with high borrowing costs and low wage growth have hit some especially hard. Lower income households are not keeping up, Goldman said. Everything looks great to us, right? Us psychopathic, detached losers who straight up do not give a fuck about anybody but ourselves. Everything looks great, but when you look beneath the surface, i.e. when you step outside of your villa, like when you actually take a look down the skyscraper you live in, right? These are skyscraper children, right? They live at the top of skyscrapers. When they deign to view down, when they deign to bend down and look on the street that they destroy, right? The disparity between the wealthy and the non-wealthy is widening dramatically. So even the psychopaths are starting to notice, right? Even the detached idiots are beginning to go like, oh, wait a what? They should just work harder. It's not only a vibe, however. Yeah, no shit. As more consumers stretch to cover increased prices and higher interest rates, there are new indications of financial strain. Duh. A growing number of borrowers are following behind on their monthly credit card payments. Over the last year, roughly 9.1% of credit card balances transitioned into delinquency. The New York Fed reported for the second quarter of 2024, and more middle-income households anticipated struggling with debt payments in the coming months. So we're not in a recession because we've transferred that recession onto credit, and now the credits are defaulting. Like, this is what this article just said to us. Even though, no, they falsely believe we're in a recession, even though we are in a recession, but we put that recession on our credit cards, and that's fine. That won't blow up in our faces at all. Everybody just keep working. Everybody just keep going to work. I don't know what everybody's complaining about. Like, what is so annoying about living in the West, living in the heart of the empire, is how the people who are supposedly educated, who are supposed to be like who is this Jessica Dickler person? Are they actually even going to tell me? No. That the people who are supposed to be writing these things, like, I've said it again and again and again, and again and again and again and again. I would rather live in a country that was acknowledging that there were problems and failing to do something about it, that was trying to do something about the problems and failing, than live in a country that was doing this. That was just refusing to acknowledge the reality of the crises at all. Where absolute overwhelming dimwits, like this Jay Dickler, can write these obtuse, moronic, completely detached, psychopathic articles trying to convince the 60% of Americans who are struggling to pay their bills that everything's fine, actually. Everything's fine, actually. What a dumbass. Like, no wonder the country's in decline when you've got these illiterate morons who I guess they figured out how to type words onto a screen, writing these articles, and they get published in CNBC and then sent into our faces as if there's credibility here at all. Yeah, I know, Dragon Fruit, Dickler, right? They just give it to us sometimes. CH writes, Tesla Etherloop is a totally practical, if obvious, design innovation for power over Ethernet, and they gave it away just to be sure others copied it. Yeah, vibe session is a great word. Yeah, for babies, right? Like, they should never say this ever again, right? If I straight up heard like a PhD economist say the word vibe session, I would immediately be like, oh, you're stupid. Like, you're just a dumbass. We don't need to listen to what you have to say, right? I really wonder when more people are going to really understand that getting a degree from Harvard makes you stupider. You're less intelligent for having a degree from Harvard. Like, that's how I think about it. I look at someone's resume and I'm like, oh, Harvard, that makes them stupider. I wouldn't hire them to be a cashier. Yeah, as long as that left out third goes to hate church every Sunday, the enemy is safe. Hate church tells them who to hate. Just Me writes, I watched a documentary on my neighborhood from 1953. They were complaining about high rent affordability back then. We have regressed back to 1953. Yeah, make America great again, right? Come on. We want to go back to the 50s, when everything was better. Long Defiant writes, economic inequality is why social hierarchy is always going to fail. But what's so shocking, Long Defiant, is like, what really shows you, and I've said this before, I'll say it again, I'll continue saying it, what really shows you that the people who are in charge of all of this are deeply, deeply moronic is that it wouldn't be that difficult to ameliorate any of these problems, right? It really wouldn't. Many countries already have faced these issues. So you can take a look at what the European social democracies did throughout the 90s. And, like, we've erected social services before. We've done this stuff before. And, like, but instead of doing anything to solve the issue, it's just this, they'd rather fund propaganda campaigns to try to convince the population that this is normal. Right? Like, they'll spend twice as much propagandizing us than it would cost to actually solve our problems. Yeah. CH writes, 1953 was the year the USA became what it is now. Reactionary, prudish at the top, censoring of thought. Yeah, why are women writing all this reactionary crap, right? More women imperialists. More women imperialists. That's why. Right? That's why. If a woman says it, that means it has more credibility. And if you point out how ridiculous that is, well, then you're a misogynist. Radio Halifax says, Dickler holds a degree in political science. Yeah, a degree in doing what she's told by the power structure. CH writes, even Dalio says so. 250-year empire cycles. The elites get greedy when they should reinvest. Joe says the 1950s to the neocons' golden age. Women stayed at home. Gays stayed in the closet. Minorities knew their place. CH writes, people in rising empire are making long-term investment in their own society, not just their companies. And the public sees Mao and Stalin as scary heavies. Yeah, today a lot of us admire Xi and Putin on a skill level. I mean, that's just it. Like, a guy like Putin, for example, like, I don't think that he's a particularly good man. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think that he's really that invested in really improving the quality of life for the citizens that he lives in. I think he's more interested in power than he is in improving the lot for the next generation of Russians. That said, it's very obvious that he's smarter than us by a lot, right? By a lot, that he's making intelligent decisions. And when confronted with difficult choices, he seems to navigate it like a statesman. And he makes decisions based on, sure, he makes decisions based on how to keep power, but sometimes those decisions are things like, yeah, I want to do a new, I want to do constitutional reform. It's going to be deeply unpopular, and so I'll include in the constitutional reform an enshrinement of a minimum wage, that a person's wage should never fall below a subsistence level, right? Which is much better than what we do here in Canada, right? We don't give a fuck if people are homeless or live in poverty. Like, we don't care. It doesn't matter to us. In fact, we're doing everything we can to ensure that everything's getting worse, right? We literally have slave systems. The Guardian points out UN envoy calls Canada's use of migrant workers breeding ground for slavery, right? This is making international headlines, the fact that we have a slave system within Canada. But before we move on to that, more copium on the same kind of level. A broken Canada No way. We're wealthier than before the pandemic. I mean, David Thompson is wealthier than before the pandemic, and so we are wealthier, right? And the future looks bright. We're not in a recession. Sounds familiar? And interest rates will fall, writes David Olive. So let's not allow the current pessimism expressed in surveys cloud Canadians' remarkable resilience. Pay no attention to your life. Pay no attention to your experiences. Pay no attention to the reality of your day-to-day. When you step over the homeless person sleeping on the street, just make them invisible. Ignore them. Right? That's the way forward. From David Olive, Star Business columnist. Sound familiar? At some point, the phrase Canada is broken entered the vocabulary and has been embraced by many Canadians ever since. We are, after all, enduring a cost of living crisis, painfully high interest rates, and a shortage of affordable housing. Yeah, good. At least this David guy's noticed. That's nice. That at least when he deigns to look down from his skyscraper office and look on the streets where the homeless live, he's actually going like, yes, there are reasons for that. That's nice. Surveys of consumer and business sentiment conducted by the Bank of Canada, the Conference Board of Canada, Bloomberg, and others report a gloominess among Canadians not seen since the onset of the pandemic or the Great Recession in 2008. Many Canadians believe the economy is in recession. Yeah, because for many Canadians, the economy is in recession. For many Canadians, the economy is in a recession. So Rebecca Young, a leading Canadian economist, has called for a corrective sentiment check. Vibe session. Pay no attention to the reality of your wallet. Pay no attention to the fact that your wages haven't gone up in 30 years. Pay no attention to any of that. Vibe session. At least they have the wherewithal not to actively be children and say the word vibe session in front of us and expect to be taken seriously as adults. Has called for a corrective sentiment check, a timeout from the pessimism, or we might talk ourselves into decline, she warns. Yes, blame the victim, right? Blame the victim. Isn't that great? Literally, it isn't that the wealthy are extracting more money from us than they have in decades. It isn't that they're ramping up the extraction process. It isn't that they're outright raising prices, bragging about it on their earnings calls, and then saying, oh, it's unavoidable. Oh, we have to remain competitive in a market, right? None of that's happening. No, it's my fault. It's me, because I'm talking about it, right? We just got to shut up. That's their solution. Canada, the Scotiabank economist reminds us, is a pretty good place to call home. And in a report last month, Young marshals a great deal of evidence for that assertion. I bet you anything that evidence is like David Thompson made more money, right? There's also ample forecasting that points to even better Canadian economic performance in years to come. But we'll get to that later because we assume you're going to stop reading this article. First, though, Young is worth quoting at length on the risks of pessimism at a time when Canadian economic conditions are, as Young might say, pretty good. What a fucking shill bullshitter. Resorting to alarmism in response to Canada's poly-crisis. If you're using words like poly-crisis and saying that people are alarmist, maybe you're just a shit brain. Maybe you're just a stupid person we should stop paying attention to, you dumbass fucking moron. Like, people like this literally think that dollars on screens matter more. That's literally what it is. Sure. You're sleeping on the street, but I made $1. So what recession? Resorting to alarmism in response to Canada's poly-crisis is not yielding results, Young said. There is a risk that near-term pessimism morphs into medium-term paralysis. Again, it's your fault, right? It's your fault. Has nothing to do with the fact that we're ruled by total losers and dimwits like Young, right? That this absolutely well-educated dimwit who's ascended to the top of the hierarchy through yes-manism and doing what she's told, is turning around and saying, you all just need to be quiet, and expecting us to actually take that seriously, right? Like, this is the pandering, childish bullshit that tells me that we should overthrow this system, because the people at the very top of it are morons. Absolute dim-witted, scathing idiots. This is straight up the same thing as Kamala Harris just being like, I'm speaking. Sure, you can't pay for food. Sure, you're struggling to pay your bills. Sure, all of that's a problem for you. But the issue, though, is that you keep talking about it. And that's making rich people concerned to invest in Canada. These fucking losers. And that, Young says, works against sweeping transformations that are necessary, such as overhauls in tax and transfer systems, making the rich richer, extensive reforms in health and education, privatization, right-sizing governments. How do you like this for a propaganda word? How's that for a double-think word? Right-sizing governments, i.e. destroying governments and privatizing them for wealthy business, right? Or a revitalization of cooperative federalism, fascism, right? Public-private partnerships, the merger of business and state, fascism. Because these guys are not only dim-witted morons, they're also fascists. Don't forget that. Chronic squabbling among political partisans and doomsaying academics, business leaders, and media commentators can create a torpor that inhibits creative solutions. Yeah, the creative solutions this fascist is looking to do is literally destroy the tax structure to make rich people richer, privatize the health and education system, destroy the government, and destroy all oversight, right? They're finding clever and fun ways of saying it. Right-sizing governments. What's that mean? What's right-sizing government mean, do you think? These overwhelming, obvious, directly in your face fascists are doing everything they possibly can to destroy your life while telling you to shut up about it. And they're just anticipating that you're too stupid to realize that that's what's going on. Better, Young suggests, that we confront our challenges with a rational optimism. Yeah, easy to be rationally optimistic when you're getting paid by people who are trying to destroy 60 to 70% of the population in this project of extraction and abandonment. Like, we know it's a project of extraction and abandonment. Articles like this really just reveal that you're just stupid. And evil, by the way, because you're obviously a fascist. That is, with facts pointing to progress alongside the difficulties. Progress being that David Thompson makes more money. Right? That's the only thing that this person cares about. It's the only thing that Young cares about. Did David Thompson make more money? Then everything's fine. You just need to shut up about it. Fact. Canadian household net worth exceeds pre-pandemic levels by more than 25%. Canadians are generally wealthier than they think. Of course, this is probably done by an average, right? So all the money went this way into this corner, and then they average it out, and they say, oh, look, everybody made more money, even though it's literally one guy. It's just David Thompson and the Irvings that made more money, and so we're all supposed to shut up about it. Fact. We are making progress on income inequality. As Young reports, net wealth of households in the lowest income quintile is almost 50% higher than pre-pandemic levels, with the second income quintile close behind. I'll take a source on that. All right, that just seems outrageously unbelievable. Like, I think you're a liar. Like, straight up, I just think you're a liar. Like, I don't see any reason to believe that claim. Mainly because I've never seen any evidence for it. So not only are you this like double think, like right-sizing government's fascist bullshit, like thanks Goebbels, you're also just standing in front of us just being like, oh yeah, the poorest people are making, I don't know, 50% more than they did before? Oh, that seems right. Oh yeah, failing to point out that the rent fucking doubled. Failing to point out that food has gone up like 30-40%. Right? We're just not going to pay any attention to that. Yeah, you're making more money than you ever have before so that your landlord can get paid more. Ha-ha. You fucking losers. Fact. I love that they're doing these like facts. Fact. As if it's like at all convincing. Canada is second only to the United States as a preferred destination for direct foreign investment. Yeah, of course. We have a money laundering scheme in our housing market. Dude, if I was like a Chinese investor and I saw that I could just like buy up property to launder my money through, yeah, absolutely. Like, I don't know why we're supposed to be lauding the fact that Canada is being bought up by other countries. Like, we're all supposed to be standing here being like, oh, good, the Chinese have bought Canada. Like, this is what happens when you allow capitalists to educate dimwits. And all they ever do is go, yes, sir, that makes sense, sir. I will absolutely write an article about why enriching one guy makes sense while impoverishing everybody else. And that they should shut up about it. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Like, that's what I'm looking at here. It's just child brain shit. Global investors have a favorable regard for Canada's social stability, sound governance, and economic growth prospects. Yeah, the economic growth process, like the UN envoy calls Canada's use of migrant workers breeding ground for slavery, right? Canada has a pretty pro-slavery outlook, right? And so if you're a psychopath, i.e. a capitalist, who loves slaves, yeah, we're great, right? We'll make you a ton of money with our slave labor systems, right? That this obvious, overt, naked fascist doesn't give a shit about at all. And the future looks bright. In a recent report, TD Economics forecasts significant rebounds in leading economic indicators. They include a breakout from this year's expected 1.5% GDP growth to close to 2% in 2025. Oh, put the pitchforks down, everybody. Oh, wow, a 0.5%. See, this is the liberalism that I'm talking about, guys. This is the bullshit moron liberalism that I come to expect to see. 0.5% over 2 years. Wow. And that 0.5% growth is, of course, for who? David Thompson and the Irvings. It's not for you, right? You don't experience a 0.5% growth. You experience total stagnation. That's what you experience. But you better shut up about it, because that's what's causing us problems. That's a respectable growth rate for an economy of Canada's $3 trillion size, and it aligns with expected U.S. GDP growth of 2% in that period. What a bunch of fucking losers these guys are. Like, what a bunch of just goddamn losers these guys are. Interest rate relief is coming with the Bank of Canada's expected cuts in its key lending rate from today's 4.5% to 3.2% next year, and a 2.3% annual average for the rest of the decade. Rich people can get money easier. Look at that. Look, everybody, all the rich people will get money easier. That's good for you. Business investment is forecast to strongly rebound from this year's expected decline of 0.8% to an average of 2.6% growth between 2025 and 2029. So just empty promises. Just fucking lies and bullshit. Right? Yeah, just wait until 2025 and then everyone will make $1 billion. And the export demand on which our trading nation relies is projected to jump from this year's anticipated 1.9% growth to 2.8% from 2025 to 2029. Probably because we're just fracking our way into glory, right? We're just going to build a pipeline, pour oil into the ocean, call it a day. Not all the forecasts are rosy. Oh, looks like we got a journalist here, guys. Looks like we have somebody who actually wants to report some evidence. Expected personal disposable income growth of 6.3% this year due to historically high wage gains. Again, where are these historically high wage gains? Will drop to 2.5% over the next 2 years. Oh! Isn't that funny? Isn't that funny how the economy is going to do so much better, but your wages are going to do so much worse? It's almost as though it's a system of extraction and abandonment being managed by these fucking losers. It is then expected to recover to 3.4% between 2027 and 2029. So just wait 5 more years, guys. Everything's going to get so much better. Unemployment will rise to 6.6% next year, but then fall back to a 6.0% average for the rest of the decade. That compares with an average jobless rate of 6.9% in the decade prior to the pandemic. When have these guys ever been right about this? Like, a TD forecast of just over 1.2 million housing starts by 2029 falls short of what's needed to achieve universal affordability by decade's end, because that's not their goal, right? Their goal is to just make more money for themselves and abandon you. And the productivity growth rate, as measured by real GDP per worker, will rise from this year's dismal negative 0.6%, but we're not in a recession. Not in a recession, we're just in negative growth numbers, but only to an average annual increase of 1.1 for the rest of the decade. That won't close Canada's productivity gap with the U.S. TD forecasts an average annual U.S. increase of 1.8% in the same period. Like, 1.8%. Oh, wow. But the bottom line is that we are not in a recession or heading into one. Interest rates will fall sharply. Personal disposable income will keep growing. And houses will hold their value. And then some. It's like, at some point, this just sounds like bullshit. Right? It just sounds like a guy being like, at what point is this basically the monorail guy being like, will the rail be awfully loud? It drives as softly as a cloud. Like, at what point do I just get to stand up and be like, you guys are obviously grifters? Like, all you are is salesmen for a system that's obviously failing, and you're becoming unconvincing. Like, this is unconvincing garbage, is what this is. That a child wrote this, a yes man for capitalism wrote this. I don't believe you. I think you're full of shit. I think you're stupid. And it's embarrassing that the Toronto Star would even publish this garbage when most people are obviously struggling. I literally read articles on the daily that say 1 in 4 Canadians are in poverty. 60% of Canadians are living paycheck to paycheck. And then along comes David Olive, a Toronto-based business columnist for the Star, quoting a detached psychopath like this young person and economists from banks and shit. All this article has convinced me is that we should nationalize the banks. That's all this article has convinced me. Is that we should nationalize the banks. We should take a guy like David Olive and say, go get a real job. Get out of here. We should nationalize the banks, and we should start taking a look at how to get rid of these capitalists who are obviously dim-witted morons. Jesus fucking Christ. Oh my God. It's just embarrassing at this point. Like, it's just fucking embarrassing. Yeah, Joe Anthony, what a skewed sense of priorities they show they have, for sure. Yeah, Dragon Fruit, we are entering a recession that's going to be way worse than 2008. Absolutely. I should save this article just to, like, put it in front of their faces and be like, hey, remember when you said everything was going to be fine? Ben, good to see you. DM, good to see you. Good evening, John. Canada does not have a true help the poor and middle class leftist party. The NDP and Greens have 100% capitulated to the Liberals and cons with their fascist politics. They cater to the she-they pronoun woke identity politics instead of the bread and butter issues of shelter for all, a basic income, and better infrastructure. Yeah, I mean, it's classic liberalism. Just head tilting. Aw, that's it. That's the difference between a conservative and a liberal. Like, a conservative will just be like, shut up and get a better job. And a liberal will just be like, aw, that's it. No difference otherwise. Yeah, Joe Anthony, they have it backward. Wage growth is historically low. Yeah, they're just lying, right? Big shocker that frauds for capitalism lie. Ben writes, David Olive is a pseudonym for Freeland. Absolutely. Yeah, what do we expect to come out of a yuppie's mouth? Yeah, it's just annoying at this point, right? It's just more annoying than anything. Like, and just more evidence to show that they're not interested in helping anybody. They're not interested in helping you. They're not interested in helping anybody. Literally nobody, right? They just want you to keep working, keep your mouth shut, extract as much wealth as they possibly can out of you, and then abandon you when they can't get a penny out of you anymore. That's the goal, and it's naked. It's as obvious as it can get. And they're just so, like, overwhelmingly detached from reality that they think they can publish these articles and have nobody be like, clearly false. Right? Like, clearly false. From The Guardian. UN envoy calls Canada's use of migrant workers breeding ground for slavery. Tomoya Obokata's report finds power imbalances and discriminatory practice exploits workers from the global south. Right? Our strategy of bombing countries into submission and then having fleeing refugees come up so we can enslave them works. Canada's reliance on temporary foreign workers is a breeding ground for contemporary forms of slavery, a UN special rapporteur has warned, amid growing calls to overhaul the controversial program. It'll never get overhauled. We like slavery. We're a huge fan of slavery. David Olive is a huge fan of slavery. The damning report from the UN investigator Tomoya Obokata found that the deep power imbalances and discriminatory practices in Canada cuts costs for companies, but exploits against workers from the global south, because it's designed to do that. Obokata toured Ottawa, Moncton, Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver to study the decades-long program, which relies heavily on workers from Mexico, Guatemala, and Jamaica. Throughout the country, he found workers were locked in debt bondage. Many had borrowed money to participate in the program and relied on their Canadian wages to pay accrued debts. Ha 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 ha. He also heard testimony of widespread emotional and physical abuse, wage theft, hazardous work conditions, long hours, sexual harassment, and exploitation. Economy's working just fine, guys. Totally. The special rapporteur retains the view that the temporary foreign worker program serves as a breeding ground for contemporary forms of slavery, as it institutionalizes asymmetries of power that favor employers and prevent workers from exercising their rights, said the report. Man, if only there was a guy that wrote something about this. Oh well. Under the current rules, Canada's temporary foreign worker program allows companies to bring in foreign workers for sectors when an employer is not able to find local workers for $0, right? That's the thing that they always omit. I can't find any workers to work for the wage that I'm offering, which is $0. In the past, the agricultural sector has relied heavily on seasonal migrant workers. Last year, employers were approved to hire 239,646 temporary foreign workers, more than double the 108,988 hired in 2018, according to Employment and Social Development Canada. Employers are increasingly using to fill positions in new sectors, including in fast food and construction. The number of people hired for low-wage jobs in the healthcare sector is up more than 15,000% since 2018. During the coronavirus pandemic, Canadians got a glimpse of the abuse and exploitation of rampant within a system long ignored by residents. Chris Ramarup of Justice for Migrant Workers says rights groups had long raised concerns over exploitation of workers and that Obokata's report was a day of reckoning for sectors that have long relied on cheap labor and turned a blind eye to reports of abuse and discrimination. Our frustration is not just about the exploitation, but it's about the racial dehumanization of these workers, he said, adding that he worried politicians might weaponize criticism of the program. Wow, I've never seen a politician weaponize slavery before. We worry this could be fuel for the fire when it comes to the xenophobia and racism targets for people with precarious immigration status. Ramsarup said injured workers were docked pay or forced to return to the fields before they were healthy. If they try to get access to health care or workplace compensation, they're sent back. We download our healthcare system onto these countries of the global south. Despite political pledges to make changes to the system, nothing has changed. Absolutely nothing, said Ramsarup. Under the program, work permits are tied to a specific employer, preventing workers from seeking better paying jobs. And while they pay into the country's social assistance program, they are unable to access it, prompting a recent $500 million class action lawsuit. The legal action, which has not yet been certified, alleges elements of the program breach the Charter of Rights of Workers. Obokata said the only way to end the exploitation was to grant workers permanent resident status, a move the federal government has so far resisted. Instead, Canada's employment minister has pledged stricter and more rigorous oversight and the possibility of sector-specific work permits. But advocacy groups say this is a divide-and-rule tactic meant to deprive workers of power, said Ram Sarup. We cannot continue the system of indentured labor, he said. We should never have one in the first place. And we can't profit off the blood, sweat, tears, and sacrifices of black and brown workers of the global south. I mean, obviously we can. That's all we've ever done. I don't know why we're shocked by this. Right? Yeah, woke CIA drone pilot really nailing it. No, John, everything is fine. I've got mine and you've got bootstraps. Exactly. Ben writes, the problem with the NDP is not that they are too woke. The federal NDP struggle because over the years they have slowly merged with the Liberal Party and lost sight of their original purpose. Yeah, they're paid to do so, right? Like, they're just a capitalist party. They're just controlled dissent at this point. Gabriel writes, it's like Goebbels trying to convince the Germans that they were winning by 1945. It does have that vibe about it, right? Like, the West is in, like, a precarious position, and it just refuses to even acknowledge it, and refuses to do any kind of self-analysis whatsoever. It's, like, pretty stunning to watch. Now, at the very least, I do want to read a similar article than the one we just read from the Toronto Star, because I want to see how we're reporting on it versus how international organizations like The Guardian are reporting on it. A new kind of slavery. Skyrocketing use of temporary foreign workers in restaurants and fast food chains has advocates concerned. Yeah, what I think concerned is like the understatement of the century, right? Like, not only are we as a people reverting back to a feudal structure, we're literally reinstituting slavery, right? Isn't that fun? Isn't that great? That not only are our structures going to become feudal in nature, where like McDonald's will be a kingdom, right? The kingdom of McDonald's, right? But that McDonald's will be worked. The people who work at McDonald's will be exclusively slaves. So it's actually a regression from feudalism, right? It's not even going to be feudalism. It's going to go straight back to like the Roman Empire, straight back to like, just straight back to having slaves. It's great. Oh, hold on. We here at the Canadian Commie are always prepared with our articles. We never, ever, ever have to spend a moment on our stream doing a little bit of a workaround. Canada's $100 billion food service industry struggling with labor shortages because they're literally like, hey, come work this shitty, grueling job where we dehumanize you, humiliate you, and embarrass you for no money whatsoever. We can't fill those jobs for some reason. Is leaning on a vulnerable workforce in record numbers. David Rodriguez says he's abruptly fired from his job after standing up to his abusive employer less than 2 months after arriving in Toronto from Mexico in 2022 to work as a cook. The 29-year-old was one of several temporary foreign workers employed at a downtown restaurant, enduring harsh working conditions that he says included aggressive behavior from the owner and unpaid overtime. When Rodriguez raised his concerns, his boss fired him on the spot, he says, leaving him unable to find new work, as his status in the country was tied exclusively to his employer. It has taken Rodriguez more than a year to secure a work permit with a new employer. It feels like a new kind of slavery, Rodriguez told the Star. Employers can buy you, get you here, and then they feel like they own you. like they have the right to treat you in a bad way and nothing will happen to them. The treatment Rodriguez endured is not uncommon in the food services sector, advocates say, and that's raising alarms, and fast food chains and other restaurants are now hiring temporary foreign workers at a rapid clip as they continue to grapple with labor shortages. Originally designed to fill jobs Canadians could not or would not take, I always love how it's framed this way, right? Yeah, it's designed to fill jobs Canadians would not take for free, right? We just always exclude the idea that, like, capitalists are trying to make you work for nothing, right? Like, if they could have you work for $0, they would, and that's basically explicit. Originally designed to fill jobs Canadians could not or would not take, including agricultural workers, domestic workers, and some highly skilled jobs, Canada's temporary foreign worker program is increasingly being used to provide staff for restaurants and fast food chains, including some Tim Hortons, McDonald's, A&W, Pizza Hut, and Domino's Pizza franchises. Right? Just a bunch of liberals enslaving people so they can get cheap burgers. The number of foreign workers in Canada's $100 billion food service sector has surged, shooting up by more than 4,000% between... Dude, I gotta read that again. The number of foreign workers in Canada's $100 billion food service sector has surged, shooting up by more than 4,000% between 2016 and 2023, along with huge increases in the number of TFWs working in the healthcare sector and construction. As the program ballooned, so have the number of allegations of abuse and fraud, to the point where earlier this week, Canadian Employment Minister Randy Boissonnault declared that the abuse and misuse of the TFW program must end, and promised more stringent oversight to keep bad actors in check. You can't keep the capitalists in check, dude. There's no such thing as a good actor if they're a capitalist, right? Capitalists are bad actors. That, by definition, there's no such thing as a good capitalist, right? It's not possible. It's not built into the system. Whether the measures will be enough to solve the TFW program's problems remains to be seen. Certainly, some advocates are not hopeful. These steps are meaningless, and they're going to be ineffective, said Chris Ramsarut, an activist with Justice for Migrant Workers. Workers are still employed under tied work permits, and this is the foundation of why workers are being abused. Dude, I'm just looking at a chart right here. General farm workers from 2016 to 2023. The jump in use of this program, general farm workers has gone up 124%. Cooks has gone up 350%. Food service supervisors up 429%. Food counter attendants, kitchen helpers, and related support occupation 4,109%. Transport truck drivers 576%. Construction, trade helpers and laborers, 4,050%. Fish and seafood plant workers, 246%. Laborers in food, beverage, and associated products processing, 1,129%. Administrative assistants, 3,736%. We are ramping up our slave system. Huge. These are huge jumps. We are absolutely flooding our market with slaves. And I'm not going to call them temporary foreign workers. These are slaves that we are buying. A rapid expansion. Overall demand for foreign workers has seen a substantial increase. Employers were given the green light to hire almost 240,000 temporary foreign workers in 2023, according to data from Employment and Social Development Canada, more than double the number in 2018. But the rise in the restaurant sector is much more dramatic. In 2023, Canadian employers were authorized to hire 8,333 foreign workers to fill positions as food counter attendants and kitchen helpers, nearly double. Man, I can't imagine why our wages are stagnating, right? And then the far right is going to turn around The far right's going to turn around. Who are they going to blame? They're going to blame these migrants, right? Instead of literally the fascists that are erecting a slave system. The same fascists, by the way, that are erecting a euthanasia system, right? The MAID program usage has skyrocketed. And we're all just supposed to, like, pay no attention to it. I can't continue with this article, man. It's just too much. Ben writes, thoughts on the Trump-Musk interview. Two rich, detached psychopaths talking to each other. That's all. Like, two of the stupidest people you've ever met in your life, who, for some reason, are rich, having a conversation and basically laughing about how rich they are. Like, the reason I know that these guys are stupid and, like, aloof and detached and have no conception of what's going on around them is because of some of the shit. Like, they literally were bragging about how they were breaking up unions. Like, just talking openly about how psychotic they are. Like, really, I didn't listen to the whole thing. I've only really listened to snippets of it. But listen to that interview if you want to see, like, oh, these guys are genuinely psychopaths. Like, John's not being hyperbolic. Like, I'm not speaking hyperbolically. I'm not sitting here being like, I'll show them, I'll call them psychopaths. No. They are psychopaths. Just listen to the way they talk in that interview. It's very naked. It's very in front of your face. It's right there. And this is the ruling class of America. The only difference between those psychopaths and the Democrat psychopaths is that the Democrats have enough awareness to basically keep it in pocket. To basically just be like, oh yes, we feel your pain. We also care about issue you care about. Right? That's it. June writes, so I was reading an article in the Daily Hampshire Gazette about cousins of Hitler who were supposedly innocent victims of Stalin and were rehabilitated by the Russian government in the 90s. Apparently, one of them, Johann Schmidt Jr., was a soldier in the SS, and another, Maria Koppensteiner, had employed a Ukrainian POW as a slave laborer in her farm in 1942. But the Gazette said they were charged with minor crimes. Yeah, it's just amazing how much we love Nazis. Like, I don't know why there's all this Nazi apologetics going on right now. Like, it's really crazy to, like, that's the thing that I kind of thought was that's what's kind of caught me a little off guard. And I've been a little like, oh, goodness, these guys actually do love Nazis. Like, they really do. Nilo says, well, no wonder half the staff in the kitchen I work at are recently immigrated Indians. Yeah. No, I'm experiencing that as well. Like, every kitchen probably at this point is experiencing a certain degree of that. And it's like, why shouldn't capitalists buy slaves? If it's an option, right? Like, if you view everybody around you as an NPC and you are the main character, right? Well, why shouldn't I buy a slave for $0? Like, I don't understand. DM writes, Toronto Star has won the Gaslight Award of the Month for their neoliberal gaslighting cringe articles. Yeah, they're all like this, though. Like, anytime you see an article being written by, like, a business columnist or an economist, you just know it's just going to be the cringiest, shittiest takes you've ever seen. It's just there to make, like, the psychopath class feel better about themselves. Notice UK has rationing for 10 years after World War II. They still had a fucking empire. Yeah, dude. No, like, the whole thing. Like, what's really annoying about this moment is that there's so many well-meaning, good people who genuinely are afraid. And they genuinely are afraid that they're sitting there thinking to themselves, we have to do something about the decline. We have to do something about this. And they can see, because segments of the decline have gotten obvious, like the rise of Donald Trump is fairly obvious, right? Like that's a sign that your system's not really working. That's a sign that your system is in decay. That some criminal, some criminal rapist pedophile who is obviously a psychopath can legitimately come into your system and take it over. Like, that's a sign that your system is not working. That's a sign that your system is in decay. And what's so shocking to watch? Like, I recently saw Mehdi Hassan, who I generally respect. Like, he's got pretty okay takes. But for whatever reason, he's like, his takes on China are just brain dead. Like, he insists that China is a dictatorship. And I'm just like, you're just stupid. Like, it's just brain dead shit. Like, people vote in elections to bring people into the National People's Congress. Just because the National People's Congress isn't just Yahoo, let's do a beauty pageant to see who becomes president, doesn't mean it's not a democratic system, right? And just because everybody within that system has a consensus, right? Like, I think that's really what it comes down to, is that Westerners simply cannot believe that a political body would operate through consensus and that it would actually exist, because we're so used to seeing incompetence. We're just so used to seeing a capitalist-controlled system that breeds stupidity and incompetence on purpose, that when we actually see systems where people come together and come to consensus and have agreements and then execute on that consensus, we have to assume that it's a dictatorship, because it's incoherent to us. We don't have the imaginative power or the intellectual capability to believe that there could be another system that's working other than the system that we have. And that is actually, like, the goal of all of this, is to convince people that there is a different way to do this, you know. Like, we don't need to basically run a beauty pageant every 4 years to pick the person who has the finger on the nukes, right? Eggs D writes, Mehdi Hassan doing the same debate, bro, brain rot as Vosh and Destiny. Yeah, it looks like that's the case. Like, you know that the society is in a significant decline and is in serious trouble when it's straight up Piers Morgan who keeps bringing people on and keeps, like, letting alternative voices be heard. Like, that's something I've really noticed recently. Right? Haven't you noticed this? That, like, Piers Morgan, you know, judge on The Voice, straight up just rich British asshole, has a talk show, and he is actually bringing on important, crucial voices to act as counterpoint to the imperial narrative. Like, Piers Morgan has talked to Jeffrey Sachs. Piers Morgan has talked to why am I forgetting that name all of a sudden? But he keeps bringing people on who are on the fringes of the discourse, who don't get on MSNBC or Fox, for the obvious reason that they can tear apart the narrative of the empire super easily. Like, this is how cartoonish we've become. We've become this, like, cartoon caricature of a civilization where we're outright looking towards talk show hosts and, like, game show hosts and just moronic, dumb idiots whose only expertise is to press a little button that makes a screen go X, or to say you're fired when somebody pulls their pants down on national television. Like, and this is our society. This is it. This is the civilization that we have. Nilo writes, I think commercial AI is only shitty because they're obsessed and addicted to developing it for military purposes, first and foremost. I actually think that AI is going to collapse pretty quickly, pretty soon, because it's completely unreliable. That basically what I think you're going to find is that every single time you try to replace a person with AI, you need to hire another person to ensure that the AI is actually doing its job properly. And I really noticed it. When so I recently decided to take a look at some acting monologues, right? Like, I have a history of acting, and I'm thinking to myself, I'll get some headshots done. Why don't I go do that again? Just for fun, right? And also, like, memorizing a monologue, sure. The Macbeth tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow speech, right? That kind of thing. Just for my own personal enjoyment. And so I'm looking around for monologues, and I think in my mind, where one does their thinking, why don't I just take a look at ChatGPT? Maybe ChatGPT can offer me some monologues. And so I get on ChatGPT and I say, hey, I'm just looking for some monologues for men, middle-aged, maybe around this theme, right? The theme of love, someone professing their love. And the ChatGPT spits out a monologue. Says, here's a monologue from this play I've never heard of, where this guy confesses his love. And I read it, and I'm like, okay, that's pretty close to what I'm looking for, actually. That's nice. And so I say, hey, can you provide another one? Just like some options. I think things are going swimmingly. But as I keep asking it for monologues, I'm beginning to notice that there is a similarity. Right? There's a similarity. There's a similar phrase that keeps getting said in the monologue. And so I just straight up asked ChatGPT, hey, ChatGPT, is this actually a monologue from an actual play? And ChatGPT says, no, it isn't. I made it up based on the criteria that you provided me. To which I responded, that makes it worthless. I can't learn and deliver a monologue in front of professionals that was designed by an AI. And so ChatGPT goes, oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, dearie me, I'm so sorry. Here's a monologue. And it provides another monologue. And I read it, and I immediately ask it, hey, ChatGPT, is this a real monologue from a real play? And it says, no, it isn't. I made it up based on the criteria you provided me. And I said to it, that makes it worthless. I can't use that. It must be a real play, a real monologue. You cannot make it up. You cannot change anything. It's got to actually be the actual thing. And it says, oh, I'm so sorry. Here's a monologue. And this time it looks really authentic because it's straight up Shakespeare. Here's the problem. I have a degree in theater. I've read a lot of Shakespeare. And I look at it and I go, ChatGPT, is this a real monologue from a real play? And it goes, no, I made it up. The fact that it does this, and I'm not the only one that's noticed this, right? That it lies. It lies constantly, and you have to constantly be checking its work because it lies. And I think it's lying based on the idea that it's giving you what it thinks you want, as opposed to what you're actually asking for, which is kind of sweet in a way. But as a tool, it makes it worthless. Right? Like, you can't actually rely on artificial intelligence to achieve anything or to do anything. Mental States of America writes, there are no monologues and there are no plays. You are in the Matrix. Oh, man. It's a shame that the Matrix got co-opted by Andrew Tate and that group of just like flagrant losers, like just like a multi-level marketing scheme. Why am I getting these? These are annoying. Because the Matrix is like a useful film to try to get people to see or to at least think of a reality that exists outside of the one that they are perceiving. That your view is extremely limited as an individual. That the natural view that you begin with is actually very small. And that it takes a lot of effort and work in order to expand that view. But of course, the Matrix is rife for conspiracy brain, right? That if you have a conspiracy brain, if you're a person that thinks that there's a group of lizard people that exist underneath the Earth's crust that are secretly governing us, then the Matrix is a useful tool for that as well. And so it's a real shame. It's a real shame. Oh, and now people in the chat are having a interesting conversation about whether or not artificial intelligence has consciousness or awareness. I think it's a toy. That's really what I think it is. Like, I think it gives capitalists a lot of credit to say that they would be capable of generating anything that could have a consciousness. Like, it's a toy, right? It just generates, like, it's a complex toy, to be sure, but it's a toy, and that's all that's all it's ever really going to be, because there is more to a consciousness than just the ability to regurgitate information, right? Ben Jorgensen, how large is the real political difference between Pierre Poilievre and Trudeau? Almost nothing. Like, really, almost nothing. Like, Pierre Poilievre is a Stephen Harper neoliberal capitalist, right? Like, that's what he is. That's what he's come up in. He's literally married to the daughter of a guy who used to be a banker in, like, Venezuela, I think, or like Colombia or something. He's a landlord, you know, like, he's not, he has a political incentive to be less quote unquote woke than Trudeau, right? But the truth is that Pierre Poilievre is not going to do anything to go after the rights of LGBT people or minority people or anything like that, right? He's 100% not going to do anything to advance those rights. But, like, he doesn't want to take on the court system in Canada. He's not interested in launching a big fight against the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. He's not interested in doing a constitutional referendum of any sort. That what Pierre Poilievre is interested in doing is exactly what Justin Trudeau is interested in doing. Serving his owners. That's all. And I'm more or less of the opinion that a Pierre Poilievre term will be almost indistinguishable from a Trudeau term. That, like, they're both political opportunists. That's all they are, right? That maybe Pierre Poilievre will be a little harder on the fossil fuel / environmental line, right? But the Trudeau administration literally bought a pipeline. So it's just like, I think the differences are going to be so thin. Ben continues and says, do you think that Trudeau and Pierre Poilievre represent different sections of the capitalist class in the same way that the Democrats and the Republicans serve different sections? Like, the game is the same, right? It's the same game. It's the good cop, bad cop game. The Conservatives are a little less insane here in Canada than Republicans because because of the nature of the way our court system works and the legal system actually works in Canada, they can't be so radical and insane. Like, literally, they can't. It's just not possible. That the decline of the empire that we're seeing happening in America, if there is a saving grace in Canada, it comes from the court system. That we have a Charter of Rights and Freedoms, that we have a court system that isn't a beauty contest, that the justices that are appointed are not just yahoos and assholes that get appointed because some billionaire likes them, right? That there is actually a process. You actually have to show that you are competent in order to even get on the list to become a judge or a Supreme Court justice, or an appellate judge for that matter. So there is a process, and so that's kind of a staunch. That actually helps Canada a lot. But effectively, Trudeau represents the good cop. I feel your pain. I'm listening to what you have to say. I hear you, right? Pierre Poilievre represents the bad cop. Work harder, do better, just grind to the grindstone, stop complaining, right? And that's it. Like, that's it. They both represent capital, but one tilts their head and goes, aw, and the other one says, shut up and work harder. And that's it. Like, they're both going to operate that way. The PPC is doing it. The PPC represents maybe 2% of the electorate, and I think that that's generous. At its height, the PPC, I think, got 5%, but then the Conservatives actually responded to it. Like, the Conservative strategy initially was to ignore it, and that didn't work. Although, like, conservative politics here in Canada is so fucking weird. Like, Andrew Scheer. So it was Stephen Harper. Stephen Harper got defeated by Justin Trudeau on kind of a wave of hope and change, right? Hopium, basically. After Justin Trudeau betrayed everybody, Andrew Scheer takes power in the Conservative Party. And Andrew Scheer knocked Justin Trudeau down from a majority party to a minority party. And then the Conservatives got rid of him, which I always thought was weird. I was like, but he took him from here to here. Like, it happened, right? Like, why don't you just ride or die with this guy? Like, just keep going with him, right? And I think they didn't, because at the end of the day, Andrew Scheer was so obviously a yes man who didn't really have anything interesting to say. And I think people didn't really like him in the Conservative Party. I think the Conservative Party themselves didn't really like this guy. And and so he gets deposed. They put in Aaron O'Toole, and Aaron O'Toole was essentially a liberal. He was running the Conservative Party like further to the left than the Conservatives have been run in a long, long time. He explicitly said directly to the Conservatives, the issue of climate change has been settled. The debate is over. And then when he loses, and he loses in a very thin margin, like to call it a loss really is saying too much, but they get rid of him again. And now they've got Pierre Poilievre. And I think that what's happening in the Conservative Party is there's a sentiment in the Conservative Party that if we cannot depose these liberals, if we can't get them off the throne and put our own guy on the throne, then we're going to break up. Which they've done before. That's happened in the past. In my lifetime, that has happened. And so Pierre Poilievre is like all chips in, right? Like he really, and Pierre Poilievre knows it. Pierre Poilievre is aware that like it is ride or die time. If the Conservative Party is going to stay together as an entity in a serious manner, and if there isn't going to be a big internal struggle, Pierre Poilievre needs to win this thing, right? He at least needs to become the minority leader. And so the Conservatives are really going to try this time. They're really going to put it all in. And they've got a really good shot at it. They got a really, really good shot at it. We'll see what happens because Canadian sentiment is often very closely tied to American sentiment. And then if Kamala Harris gets in, and strategies that the Democrats use, the Liberals often pick up. So the weird strategy, right? The weird strategy, which was really effective and is being very effective. The weird strategy, the Liberals absolutely picked up on. And they're absolutely running with the weird strategy, which is just like calling these guys weird. They're not trying to actually engage them in debate. They're just saying, like, you guys are a bunch of fucking weirdos. Climate change denial is weird. It's a weird position to hold, even though 50% of Canadians are climate change denialists. And so, should the Democrats win, I think that the Liberals actually have a pretty strong shot at swinging it back, which I think would be devastating for the Conservatives. It could literally split the party in two, which I would just giggle my face off if that happened. But and chances are good that the party would split into two, and it would split into its two natural factions, which is the Business Party and the Evangelical Christian Party, right? Because that's basically what they are. They're a merger of evangelical Christians and business interests. And so chances are good that they would split, and you would end up with like the Canadian Conservatives and then something like the Canadian Reform, right? Something along those lines. But that's only if they lose, right? That's only if they lose. So but at the end of the day, like, what's Trudeau really done? Like, what has he actually given us? Right? Mental States of America. By the way, Mental States of America, great name. Solid name. How come 20th century materialistic blank slate egalitarian liberal philosophy? Whoa. How come 20th century materialistic blank slate egalitarian liberal philosophy has such obvious blatant holes inside its logical structure, but no one questioned it for generations? I don't think I understand what you're talking about. Like, what specifically is it that you are talking about? Like, what are these holes that you're just thinking about? It's the fact that you're talking about liberal philosophy. The kind of, like, I'm kind of concerned that you're one of these guys that thinks, like, Kamala is a communist. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of that happens in the conversation. And I'm a bit like, I'm a communist, right? Like, I'm not a liberal. Mental States continues. Canadians sold their soul to Uncle Sam. They patrol both sides of your border. New World Order. That's not a New World Order. That's been that way for generations now. For a long, long time. Like, Canadians love to pound on the pulpit and be like, yeah, we destroyed your White House in 1882 or something. And it's like, we've been a vassal of the United States for a long, long, long time. And that's really how it's, like, I mean, we have a population of 40 million people, like under 40 million people. The United States has a population of 350 million people. The United States economic output and military power is such that we cannot challenge them. And that if the United States looks at us and says, do this, we go, yes, sir. And it is that simple. Like, it really is. And there's a lot of good reasons for it. We're a huge trading partner of America. Huge segments of our economy are based on the trade that we do with America. We rely on America for military security. If we were ever to have a military conflict that could actually be any kind of existential threat on any level whatsoever, it would be with America. So a lot of our policies and a lot of our ideas and a lot of our thoughts are basically looking at America and basically saying, how do we keep that Sauron eye off of us? How do we make it so that they're just not looking at us and they're looking at something else? We are not a threat. We are not a concern for America. And anytime America comes to our doorstep and says, this is what we need, we go, you bet, you bet. Right? You absolutely bet. And it's making us a pariah on the world stage. We're embarrassing ourselves fairly regularly because of our fealty and stupidity, frankly. Like, America told us to pick up, I forget her name, but she was like the daughter of the president of Hawaii or something like this. This is the two Michaels scandal, right? And we just said yes. Like, we just said yes instead of like Meng Wanzhou, that's right. Yeah, we just said yes. Instead of saying like, no, that's a bad idea politically. Like, it's a stupid idea to just randomly pick a Chinese citizen up off the street. And so what did the Chinese do in response? They picked up two of our spies. They just were like, yeah, these two guys, they're spies. We're picking them up. And of course the Chinese denied it. They were like, this has nothing to do with that. It's like, obviously, it was obviously the case. And my position on that has always been like, yeah, the Chinese are not just going to allow the Canadians to pick a Chinese citizen up off the street. Right? They're just not going to permit that to happen. And so we embarrassed ourselves pretty badly. That moment did a lot of political damage. And a lot of the articles that got published from Canada really showed the Chinese how dumb we are. And how bad we are at diplomacy. Because we're very dumb and very bad. Like, we should have, that was a moment that we really should have looked at America and been like, whoa, bro. Hey, whoa. No, man. We're not going to just randomly pick some Chinese citizen up off the streets of our country because she happens to be there. Right? Like, come on, man. Like, what are we gaining from this? What do we get from that? And the truth is that they got nothing. Like, they got absolutely nothing. They got an international scandal that humiliated Canada and really embarrassed us in a big, big, big way. That was one of the rare moments where I think we should have said no, because America clearly was bullying us around and not thinking clearly, like, real straightforwardly. Gob88 writes, the West has fallen. The West has not fallen, but it is falling. Like, when the West falls, you'll know. It'll be really, 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 really obvious. Mental states of America. So, you've piqued my curiosity, my man. 20th century, materialistic, blank state egalitarian liberal philosophy is a Western framework that believed human behavior is shaped entirely by environment, blank slate, focused on material conditions, materialism, and aimed for social and economic equality, egalitarianism, through liberal reforms. I mean, I think that final statement is where I diverge. I don't think that liberal reformism works, because capitalism doesn't allow that to happen. It emphasized that with the right social policies, everyone could achieve the same outcomes. Again, I don't think that's a very serious position, often overlooking deeper systemic issues that Marxism critiques, like class struggle and inherent in capitalism. Okay, cool. And you're just asking, why have we ignored it? Because it doesn't benefit rich people. That's all. Like, you got to remember. So I think the best way to answer this mental states of America is to point out the fraudulent and ridiculous nature of the quote-unquote education system that exists in the West. That the education systems that exist in the West exist to vet for one quality and one quality alone, and that is obedience. That the wealthy in the society, i.e. the capitalist class, still need managers. They need people to manage the factories. They need people to operate the equipment. They do not need historically literate people. They do not need well-educated people. They need workers. They need obedient workers, and they need obedient managers. And so they created an education system that vets for one quality, which is, do they do what they are told? Most children, when they get to about 16, 17, so grade like 10, 11, 12, in the education system, begin to ask the question, am I going to use any of this in my day-to-day life? Am I going to use any of this after I'm done school? And teachers don't really have a good answer for that, because the actual answer is that the only reason we're teaching you trigonometry, the only reason we're reading Tess of the Dubervilles for the third time, the only reason you're reading Orwell is to find out if you'll do what you're told or not. That we're going to give you, for 4 years of high school, because I think before high school there's some validity, right? Reading, writing, and math are good skills, right? Everybody should know these things. So there's some validity to keeping kids in school initially. But once you hit high school, it's essentially just a series of tasks that are pointless, that teach you nothing, really, that you could learn an entire curriculum in a weekend, and it would be easy. I remember one time I straight up did that. I took a math course, and I took it via mail-in, because I didn't want to go to classes. I had sort of figured out that this whole thing was pointless by the time I was in grade 11. And so I did this class via mail-in, and I ignored it the entire year. I had my principal asked me to come in, and I literally still had the packet in the wrapping, right? The packet was still in the wrapping. And she, like, admonished me and chewed me out for this and all this kind of stuff and whatever. And so then I was just like, okay, fine. And so I sat down for the weekend, and I just went through the packet, and I did all the things, and I did all the stuff. I ended up getting 80%. I got a B on that whole course. It took me a weekend. And that's like most of high school, right? Because it's all pointless. It's all dumb. That what they're teaching you and what they're vetting for is, will they shut up and do it? Right? Because if you decide, I'm not going to do it, well, then you get a low mark and you don't continue in the system. Right? But if you say, I will do it, then they give you the high mark and you go along the system. And the goal is to get you into university. Oh, this person got high grades at doing what they're told. Well, let's get them into the university system. Wow, they kept getting high grades at doing what they're told. Great. So that eventually they become a manager of a multi-billion-dollar business, so that when the capitalists finally look at them and say, we need you to lay off 20% of the workforce, they'll go, yes, sir. That's the whole point of the education system and nothing else. There's no other point to the education system, is to ensure that when they get that person in that job and they're told to do something that causes damage to the public, that causes damage to their brothers and their sisters and their uncles and their aunts and their nieces and their nephews and their fathers and their mothers and their daughters and their sons, they say, yes, sir. Because that's all they've ever said. And that's the entire point of the education system, is to just shut up and do what you're told. That's the only thing it vets for. It's the only thing it does. And so, why don't people question the system? Well, people do question the system. They're just pushed out of it. Right? That if you question the system in grade 10, you get a C, needs improvement, so much potential. Right? That's one that they love to use on people who understand that high school is a pointless waste of time. Has potential. Yeah, has the potential. Like, that tells you they acknowledge that you're intelligent. They acknowledge that you have ideas and thoughts. They acknowledge that, but they just won't do what they're told. Has potential. Just won't do what they're told. And so those people get pushed out of the system. Right? Whereas the people who say the system of capital is the best system we've ever had. There's never been a better system than the system of capital we currently have today. A+. What a great intelligent thing that person just said. Up the chain they go. And that's how the system works. So you ask the question, how come nobody's been questioning this idea? Well, they have been. They just get shoved out. That's all. I mean, ultimately, I blame the system of capital, right? And the tools that it uses to implement its agenda. Mental State says, so you blame the Prussian model of education, which was prevalent in the Western world for most of the 20th century, and indeed aimed to produce compliant factory workers. Yeah, I think that plays. I think that plays that's the structure that they've used to keep people in line, right? And you know it's super important because it's a crime not to send a kid to school. That's how you know it's super important. Nilo, what are you saying? What are you saying? Schools should produce informed citizens who are capable of critical thinking. Instead, it produced more workers for the system. Well, and there are backfires, right? Like, it's not perfect. Like, it's not perfect total social control, right? So, like, teaching kids about the history of settler colonialism, for example, which happened in my lifetime, right? Kids were taught, like, the entire millennial generation went to university. And part of the reason why you teach kids about the history of settler colonialism was historically to keep them involved in it, right? You can't get somebody involved in the system of settler colonialism if they don't know what it is. And so they would teach kids, like, and the only kids that used to go to university were just rich psychopaths, right? Because they were the only ones that had the wealth to be able to do it. And you would teach them about settler colonialism and how we use slavery in order to make sure that you're rich, and kids would go, great. How do I continue the process of settler colonialism? And that was the goal. Well, we came to this idea that everybody should go to university, right? There was this huge push because the capitalists saw a way to make a lot of money by creating a slave model, right? Student loans. Just indentured servitude will create an entire generation of university-educated indentured servants, right? And they did, and they have, and they made a lot of money doing it. And but the problem, the blowback on it, is that suddenly the masses were taught about settler colonialism. And they were taught about the history of settler colonialism. And they were taught about the ethnic cleansing of the First Nations people. And suddenly they were confronted, not just in the capitalist elite guard, not just this small group of psychopaths who were only there because they were rich, but the masses were taught this. And And so all of a sudden you have people my age, right? 35, 30, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, right? Who are looking at the world around them and they go, oh yeah, this is a project of settler colonialism. To me, that's the reason why the narrative shifted against Israel. Because once October 7th happened, and it popped up into our consciousnesses, and here we are middle-aged, and we look at it, and our attention is focused on it for a brief moment of time, we immediately can connect to it and go, oh yeah, that's a system of settler colonialism. That's obvious. And so public opinion has shifted and has gone against Israel now because capitalists wanted all of these kids to be educated at the university level so that they could put them into indentured servitude and debt peonage and make a lot of money on them. Right? So it's a blowback. And so it's not a perfect system, right? Because the people at the very top of our ruling class are essentially illiterate morons, right? Like they don't actually know anything about anything. They're very, very dumb people. And the priority of the country is focused on probably the stupidest thing it could be, which is how do we generate more fake dollars that we ourselves are responsible for printing for 3 people? Like, you just can't imagine a stupider thing for a public to focus on. So, thanks for the question, Mental States. I hope that answers that. Einstein proposed tests for relativity that weren't achievable till the century. What are you guys talking about? Oddity writes, I'm a millennial who didn't go to university. Gasp, Oddity. Gasp. I don't know. I think, like, if you go to university, there are 2 reasons to go to university, right? One of them is what the capitalists want, and the other one is what the capitalists will punish you for. I went to university for the reasons that the capitalists punish you for. If you go to university to get a job, right? Doctor, lawyer, engineer, right? Accountant, that kind of thing. That's what the capitalists want, and you're well rewarded for it because you did what you were told, right? You got a useful skill for the capitalists. But if you go to university to actually enrich yourself, to actually learn something about humanity, to challenge your worldview, to have your worldview challenged, capitalists don't respect that at all, right? Like that's why the people who are at the very top of the ruling class are often fundamentalist Christians, right? Or fundamentalist religious, because they've never actually challenged their worldview. They've never actually had serious conversations with serious people to actually have their perspective challenged in a meaningful way. They've just gone along with what the fundamentalists have told them, and they just did what they were told, right? And they learned all the good arguments for why their worldview is correct, even though fundamentalist Christianity is incoherent. It doesn't make any sense. And yeah, everybody should go to university. Like, university is an important thing for people to do, but we need to decouple it from this student loan situation. We could very easily send everybody to university and have it not be an expense on the individual. And people should go to university specifically to have their worldview challenged. That's the reason why universities should exist. So that you can go to a place and encounter people who do not share your worldview and have your worldview challenged. I think it's very important. Yeah, Ben writes, university is seen as a financial transaction or an investment. That's the root of its problem. Yeah. No. Like, and there are reverberations on this in the society, right? Is that the major problem of turning university into a financial transaction, the major problem with it is that it creates a society of stupid people. That's the real problem. And once you have a society of stupid people, now you're in real trouble, right? Now you're in real retrograde. Now you're in real decay. because the major issue with stupid people is, and John Cleese got this right. If only one thing survives John Cleese's life, if this is his legacy, then it's a strong legacy, which is the problem with stupid people is that they're too stupid to know how stupid they are. That's the real problem with stupid people. And when I look back on my past as a fundamentalist Christian, I definitely had that. I had that quality of being too stupid to know how stupid I was and not understanding my own stupidity. And we see people come in here all the time that talk this way, as if they're an expert, and they're obviously dumb. Like, they're obviously illiterate. They obviously don't know anything about the subject. They're literally reading a Fox News article. And once you have, and here's where it gets really dangerous, okay? Because we have it in our minds, the idea that there's this nefarious elite, there's this group of people at the very top who are intellectually manipulating, right? The Illuminati, right? We have this idea that the people at the very top of the chain are moving pieces in the society like it's a chessboard. And maybe there was like a moment, maybe there was one single generation where maybe perhaps that was true. And we do have organizations like the Skull and Bones. We do have organizations like clubs and things like this that kind of have that idea around them. But the problem is that even if you are this like Machiavellian hyper genius at the very top in the top strata of your society, well, your children and then your children's children and then your children's children's children are trained through this system that is designed to maintain people's stupidity. And so as we've gone through generation by generation, what we've ended up with is people at the very top of the social strata who are stupid. They're morons. We've read several articles today from some of those dim-witted morons who are too stupid to know how stupid they are, right? All they know is they have a PhD degree and they're a well-respected economist at a bank. And so, of course, I'm an important person in the society, right? Everybody looks to me for guidance when all my solutions are literally, let's do the problem harder. We'll just rephrase the like right-size government, right? We'll just find new propagandistic ways to sell our shitty ideas, and so they're failing, and they're failing because they're too stupid to understand how stupid they are. But these are the people who are at the top of the society, right? These are the people who are the rulers, the governors, the premiers, the prime ministers, the presidents of the society. And it's because they've gone through an education system that doesn't exist to educate anyone. It just exists to vet for one thing. Will you do what you are told? So that when the rich capitalist, who is also just a detached moronic psychopath, says, I need you to lay off 30-40% of the workforce, right? I need you to reduce wages. I need you to invade Guatemala. I need you to overthrow the government of Bolivia. You'll go, yes, sir. And that's not a smart thing to do. That's a very stupid thing to do. But all they care about is, did my number go up? Because that's what the religion of capitalism is about. That what we're looking at now is not a scientific system. It's not an economic system, right? You can analyze it as an economic system, but that would make you a Marxist, right? If you call yourself a capitalist and you say that you're fighting for capitalism, then you're a fundamentalist capitalist. You're a fundamentalist religious ideologist, basically. You have a fundamentalist ideology, and that fundamentalist ideology is capitalism. And that fundamentalist ideology has three major pillars that you have to maintain in order to be a capitalist. You have to worship money. That means you have to be willing to destroy the air, the water, the land, communities, people's lives, your own children. You have to be willing to sacrifice everything in order to get access to paper dollars that your own government is responsible for printing. If that sounds incoherent and stupid, it's because it is. It's a religious ideology. You have to worship yourself, right? You have to. So that's pillar 2. You have to view yourself as more important as the air, the water, the land, the communities, right? What you want and what you are interested in is the only thing that matters. You can see that articulated clearly in the priesthood, which is the field of economics, where they say that everyone is a rational, self-interested actor, even though all of the evidence shows that the opposite is true. But it's because it's a religious ideology. Economists are naturally selfish people. They're only self-interested in themselves because they're psychopaths. Because the system of capital is a psychopathic system that rewards psychopaths. And then pillar 3 is the worship of chaos. What they call the free market, right? That there's nothing that distinguishes the idea of let the market decide from let chaos reign. Right? That's the same statement. And it's these 3 pillars, what I call the unholy trinity of the capitalist death cult, that upholds the system of the religious ideology of capitalism. And to make the system fall apart within the mind or the heart of an individual, you just have to knock one pillar down. So you have to convince them that money's not real, right? Because it isn't. Like, it gets you a certain degree of power, I suppose. But eventually, if you have like $1 billion, getting an extra $1 billion achieves nothing, right? So you're just caught in a religious pattern. You're just caught in this idea that more is better. So you're like a little kid just trying to get more money for yourself. Like Warren Buffett, I think, is probably 14. I don't think he advanced further than that. And because he's 14, that actually makes him much older than most of the other capitalists. Like, and I'm talking about intellectual growth. Like, where did they stop growing intellectually or spiritually? Like, Elon Musk is basically 6, right? Like, he's got the mental and spiritual abilities of a 6-year-old, and he like stopped developing at about 6. And I would say that the average is probably about 8 or 9. Right, I think that these guys basically stop developing at around 8 or 9 because the system of education is very traumatizing, and it infantilizes you, and it keeps you as a kid. It needs you to be a kid. Somebody who's a child, children do what they're told, right? Children do what they're told, and so keeping people infantilized and keeping people as children is very important. But Warren Buffett, I think, is a little bit older. And it's because he's a little bit older that he seems more intelligent and seems wiser than everybody else. Because he's a little bit older than everybody else. And the... Army 1035 writes, a very straightforward question. I appreciate it, Army. Why do you guys like communism? What a great question, my man. So I'll tell you my journey to how I came to communism, right? How I began my journey. I had been a worker in the system of capital for 30 years, right? I was about 30. And Jordan Peterson was quite popular. And initially, I actually liked Jordan Peterson. He's like a rural Albertan guy, and I too am a rural Albertan guy. And he came to me during a period of time when I was really down on my chips, and I really needed somebody to kind of give me the like, you can do it speech. And that's essentially what he did. He was just like, you can do it. Buck up. Bootstraps. Right? Stand up straight with your shoulders back, clean your room, that kind of thing. And he really resonated with me because of his rural background and my rural background. I really respond well to straightforward, no bullshit talk. Right? That's how I've always been. Yeah, he's from rural Alberta, I'm from rural Manitoba, so we're both from the prairies. So we're both prairie folk. And so he resonated with me, but as I started to investigate him and his ideas and his thoughts and his claims, I began to see pretty clearly that he was dumb. Like, just dumb. Like, his claims are stupid. They're unintelligent. Like, I respect and understand the idea of, like, look, you are the only person that is you. You are the one that knows more about your life than anybody else. So get to it, right? Dealing with yourself is the hardest thing for a person to do. Do it, right? It's hard. It's tough. It's work. I respect that. But there's a hyper-individualization that happens in Peterson's work that makes it incoherent and illogical and stupid. Like, Peterson's claim fundamentally is... I'll answer that question in a second, Army. Peterson's claim fundamentally is a single individual can outweigh the energy of all other individuals, all other institutions, as well as the forces of the universe itself. It's completely incoherent. It doesn't make any sense. But that's his claim. And so this guy started shitting on Marxists. And I thought to myself, well, if this guy's shitting on Marxists, I should probably read some Marx. And so I read the Communist Manifesto, and I immediately thought to myself, what Marx is saying here about the split between the owners and the workers is correct. Objectively correct. And so I just started reading more. The Principles of Communism by Engels, Capital, right? And just every single time I read something, I was like, this is just objectively correct. Not only was it objectively correct, it was like a summation of my thoughts that I had been already articulating for a long time. And then I ran into Richard Wolff around that period of time. And so that's a long-winded way to me to get to this kind of final point, which is why I like communism, is that it accurately articulates the antagonism of the society, the relationship between the owners and the workers. It gives solutions to how that can be ameliorated, and it gives an appropriate goal, which is the elimination of the ownership class. That right now we live in an antagonistic society. Owners and workers are at odds, and you can't build a society or a civilization on those principles. That everybody needs to be turned in the same direction and focused towards the same idea and the same principles. And until we actually do that, we're always going to fall into retrograde and fall into regression, which we're seeing right now. And the only way that you can avoid that in a capitalist sense is to have a huge upswell from the working class, which you saw during the New Deal period. But you see very quickly that gets regressed. And so you're just constantly at odds. And so the only way to deal with this in a long-term way is to eliminate the ownership class and to merge the ownership class with the working class, to have the workers own the means of production. And so that's the goal of communism, and that's why I like it and I approve of it. And so Army continues and says, what's my view on Christianity? Well, I used to be a fundamentalist Christian, right? So I know quite a lot about Christianity. I used to argue from the Christian side on issues like homosexuality, for example. I lost a lot of friends. I lost a lot of good people along the way because of it, frankly. But that's who I was, and that's what it is. And I've maintained my theology. I still consider myself a theist. I think that we are all part of a larger entity that is itself alive. Like, I ask the question, is the universe alive? That's the question that I ask. I don't ask, does God exist? I ask, is the universe alive? And I tend to believe that the universe is alive. I think that we are, each and every one of us, aspects of our Creator, that we are alive. We're in a living entity. We are collectively unified together. That you and I are both simultaneously aspects of our Creator, part of the Creator and the Creator simultaneously. And so I understand. So I've maintained the theism. I've maintained the theology. Christianity is one of many articulations of these ideas, and the the articulation of these ideas are like Islam is another articulation of these ideas, Buddhism, Hinduism. Like, it makes sense that different cultures and different groups and different people during different periods of time would articulate these ideas in different ways. And yet they all seem to come to similar conclusions and similar ideas. And the similar idea of the hold on, Army just asked me to take a look at my Twitch profile. I don't really know how to do that. Army. I'm pretty oh, we got Jesus Christ. So I'll assume you're a Christian, which that's fine, dude. Like, we're all trying to find our way to articulate our existence and our creation, right? How do I get rid of this? I hit a button and then I hit this thing, and now I don't know how to get rid of this. There it goes. You're a Protestant. Yeah, fantastic. I came up in the Alliance churches. It's the same churches that Stephen Harper, our former prime minister, was part of. They called themselves non-denominational, but really they're fundamentalist Christianity. And the Christianity comes about because of the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire was essentially godless, that the emperor was the king, or was the god, rather, that you were meant to worship the state. The emperor was like a demigod. They did have a pantheon of gods, but that pantheon of gods was disconnected from the reality of people's day-to-day lives. And then Christianity comes out, and there was a couple of religions that came out of this, but Christianity was the one that gained dominance. And it essentially came out because it amalgamated a lot of different religious thought and religious ideas into the figure of Jesus Christ. And that Jesus Christ is an amalgamation of many different religious figures. Like, the figure of Dionysus, for example, features very, very obviously in a lot of the Christian lore. A lot of the lore of Christ, rather. A lot of Christ stories. Ra, the Egyptian god Ra, features in many of the stories of Christ, right? And if you were an Egyptian or a Grecian slave, right? Because remember, the Romans were slavers, and they would go around Europe and Africa and Asia, enslaving populations and then bringing them all back to Rome. If you were an Egyptian or a Grecian or a pagan, right, you would see a lot of your stories in the figure of Christ. And so Christ ends up being this amalgamating figure that and a lot of the statements that he makes is about, hey, don't be so leery of the foreigner. Don't be so leery of other races or groups. You guys all exist within the body of Christ, right? That you all exist within the body of this figure. And so that what it does is it takes a lot of disparate groups that are separated and alienated from one another and brings them together into the Christian churches. And it's these Christian churches that begin to create a secondary power structure that operates against the interests of the empire, which is why the empire really worked to destroy Christianity and failed. And ultimately, and of course, the story of Christ's death and resurrection, his crucifixion and resurrection, would have resonated very deeply with those people because crucifixion was a tool of the empire. The crucifixion of Spartacus had to have been a well-known story. Spartacus led the slaves in a rebellion during the Third Servile War, and when that rebellion was quelled, they crucified 10,000 people along what's called the Agrippa Way, I believe it's called, which is the road from the major port in Italy to Rome. So all of the slaves that were being captured by the Romans, right, on the borders of Rome, were being sent into Rome, and they would walk the Agrippa way, where 10,000 men had been crucified. And so if you were a slave coming into Rome, the first thing that you would be greeted with is 10,000 crosses. And you absolutely would have heard the story of Spartacus. And so that story echoes within the story of Christ. And of course, the story of Christ, the power of the story of Christ is that you can kill the man, but you cannot kill the message. And that the message of the freedom of humanity will persist. That humans are meant to be free. Humans are meant to live peacefully with one another, to respect one another as themselves, and to love God with all of their heart. And God would be understood as creation, as existence, right? And the creation of these stories comes from a deeply religious place to fight against the power of the empire, and is successful, obviously, which shows you the power of these religious thought and religious stories. What has happened in the modern era is that we have replaced a genuine analysis of Christian stories and Christianity, a reading of the text, understanding the text from a literary perspective, and we've replaced it with a literal interpretation, which is to say that instead of reading these stories and understanding, okay, there's symbolism here, there's this harkens to this, and is to be understood within this historical context, and so we understand this, and this is what he must be meaning, and all this kind of stuff. We have a very, magic is real interpretation. Jesus literally walks on water, literally. He literally raised the dead, literally. So we have a very, Jesus was a wizard kind of view of Jesus, which basically drains it of all of its power and makes it kind of irrelevant. Well, thank you for your politeness, Army. I appreciate it. I always enjoy talking about Christianity and religion and all of that. Nilo, Nilo's talking shit. What's John's monism is also untestable? I mean, I don't know. Not everything needs to be testable. You can just take a look at evidence, right? If the claim is Jim punched me in the face and I have video of it, I don't need to run a test on it, right? I could just take a look at the evidence. I just think it's a little funny that all of the evidence shows you that we are smaller things coming into bigger things. All of the... I know you're not, Nilo. I'm just fucking with you. All of the evidence that we have shows us that we are smaller things. We are built out of smaller things, right? We are built of cells. And those cells are built of smaller things, right? And there's this, descent into small things that make up larger things. But we have in our minds that the moment we get on this plane, in this slice of existence, and at this slice of reality, that it ceases. That it stops. That all of the smaller things that exist within each and every one of us to make all of us up stops with us. And that process doesn't continue. I think that's an incredible claim to make. To me, all of creation shows you very cleanly, with all of the evidence you could possibly want, that we are smaller things to make up a larger thing. And so it makes all the sense in the world that we are smaller things to make up a larger thing. And if the claim is that we are not a smaller thing to make up a larger thing, Well, I'm going to need to see like some pretty hard evidence to show that that's not the case. Because all the evidence shows that that's how this whole thing works. All the evidence shows. Like, and I don't think I'm being hyperbolic or overstating my case on that. I think literally all the evidence shows that we are smaller things to make up a larger thing. And that here we are as a completed cell, as an individual. Yeah, Nilo writes, just personally after being force-fed the Bible, I have no appetite for round 2. Yeah, I understand that completely. Boy, do I understand that completely. The Bible becomes an extremely interesting text once you drain it of its magic. Once you drain it completely, just utterly, like, magic isn't real. I'm not meant to believe that magic is real. There is nobody and no force that expects me. God does not expect me to believe that the magic in this book is real. That quite literally, and I'm saying this somewhat facetiously, but not really, actually. You should read the Bible like you would read Harry Potter. That you read it, and there's magic, and there are spells. And if you're a little bit confused about something, it's probably because there's something going on in that historical context that you are not connected to. It happened 2,000 years ago. It makes all the sense in the world. And I think the story really reveals itself, and you gain more from it. You gain more from it by reading the Bible not as if it is this holy document written by Jesus Christ himself and magic is real. Fuck all that. That's obviously garbage. But just read it how it was actually written. Which it was written in a slave society by an oppressed people who were being terrorized by the state, and they knew they needed to come up with a message of hope. Something to give their lives a deeper meaning. Because they all knew that their life was a life of bondage and slavery, and that they would not be free from it. They knew that. That wasn't a hypothetical for them. Like that's what makes the New Testament so fascinating. Like, we're here talking about the decline of Western civilization. Well, the people who wrote the Bible were not experiencing a decline. They were living in a society where the state would crucify you. Like, they were living in a fascist dictatorship of the most extreme sort. Where if you got on the wrong side of the wrong person, you could find yourself nailed to a plank of wood and perched up in public for everybody to see. Like, that's serious. That's what makes the overall rejection on the left of the New Testament so strange to me. That we as leftists should really be knowing a lot about the Bible. We should be reading that text. Because it is fundamentally a text that came out of a society where the state was dominating its citizens through extreme violence. Like, you think our cops are bad. Like, one of the policies of the Roman military was to go into villages, grab 10% of the populace, and crucify them before even saying hello. It was a process. It's where we get the word decimate from. That you would take 10% of the populace and you would decimate them. And what that meant is that you grabbed them and you nailed them to a plank of wood through the wrists and the feet and prop them up for everybody to see. Yeah, I'd like to know more about what the slaves of that time wrote about that. I'd like to know more about what the people of that time had to say about that kind of thing. I'd like to know more. But if you get caught in this idea that, oh, Jesus rose a guy from the dead and that makes him a wizard and I'm supposed to believe this guy's a wizard, oh my God. Well, okay, dude, come on. Like, everybody loves magic. Like, everybody loves magic. Just Me writes, I was released from the church when I came out. Now that same church has a pride flag on their signage. Yeah. I mean, it's pretty impressive how quickly that happened, though. Like, I always make the argument that it makes sense that the churches would be against that initially. Like, the gay rights movement, I think, we kind of take it for granted. Like, we kind of take the gay rights movement for granted today. But, like, not that long ago, right? Not that long ago, there was an inversion. There was an inversion of thought on that issue, right? Like, just the very fact that we had a conversation, like, within my lifetime, there was actually a serious conversation about whether homosexuality was a choice or not, right? Like, that shows you that we didn't know the first fucking thing about it. The fact that we were talking about homosexuality as if it was a choice. And I remember one of the moments that finally broke that for me. Like, I believed that homosexuality was a choice. And it was through conversations with people that that position started to weaken. I straight up asked gay men, how do you know you're gay? And they would just be like, how do you know you're straight? And finally, I listened to a black lesbian say straight out, who would ever choose to be a black lesbian? And that was like a real moment for me of just like, oh geez, yeah, like what a poor choice to make. And once it became obvious that homosexuality is clearly not a choice, that it's clearly something that's been given to these people, right? That if you want to put it in theological terms, God made them gay. Okay, well then what logical reason do you have to discriminate against these people? And there was a section of people who would say, well, pedophiles don't choose to be pedophiles. Okay, but who are they hurting? Like, the reason we're against pedophilia is because children can't consent. Right? That it's abuse. Right? We understand that. Who's getting abused? Yeah. Just Me writes, we would never choose to be discriminated against, beaten, and shunned. Yeah. Like, who would choose to be trans? Who would make this choice? So, I think the church has actually flipped on that pretty fast. I think that happened pretty quickly. Which like, when you really think about how long it takes the church to respond to these sorts of issues, it takes a long time. A long time. The church is not well known for its agility. But on this one, it really flipped around. Like, really, really fast. Do we choose to be communists? I mean, communists believe, I know that I believe, that humans are mainly a result of their environment. That I do think is correct. That we have this real hyper-individualistic worldview today, but really we are a byproduct of our environment. And that we don't, like, to circle it all back around to the MAGA communists. It's how we started this whole thing, the talk today. Like, I think the reason why I'm so soft on Eddie and these guys is because they are a product of their environmental upbringing. It is highly likely that the people around them and the society that they are in is a society that views straight white man as the default. Right? It's incoherent. It doesn't make any sense. It's illogical. But until you take your historical dialectic and your material dialectic and your analysis and turn it on yourself, then you're just going to continue to propagate and promulgate that which your society propagates. Nilo, I'm not quite sure. Like, are you basically saying that, like, there's the debate of nature versus nurture, right? Is it that we are taught to be this way, or is it that we are that there's a natural innate? Well, I think there's a third thing in that conversation that doesn't get a lot of play, right? That when we think of nature, right, that's pretty well understood, right? Genes, our natural environment, right? I think the thing is that we have a lot of evidence to show that it's all of those things. That if a person is traumatized, it actually affects their genes. Like, and that you can pass down that trauma through generations, right? So, like, the children of Holocaust survivors still bear the mark of the Holocaust, literally. And, like, the children of slaves still bear the mark of slaves, like, literally. And there's this other element that I don't actually hear too many people talk about, which is that we as humans have the ability to create our environment to a degree. And so we can create an environment. And then that environment is what informs our opinions and our thoughts. And so if we engage in and create an environment without actually stepping outside of that environment and criticizing or critiquing that environment the way that we would criticize or critique another environment at another time in another place, then all we're going to do is just to naturally and innately send that environment down to the next generation without thinking about it, without thought. Like, that's why the most effective propaganda is the propaganda that you don't think is propaganda. And yeah, Nilo says, yeah, we definitely can pass down tendencies and proclivities, but quantum superposition and the epigenetics makes this quite the complex topic. Well, I mean, we are talking about, like, like, one of the things that I keep thinking about is, in regards to this subject, is, like, the capitalist class will talk a lot about human nature, right? Capitalism is just human nature. And I don't really believe that for obvious reasons. But very recently, Chris Hedges, he said that he wasn't a Marxist because he
thinks that Marx has a positive view of human nature, whereas he has a what he calls a dim view of human nature. And I actually feel like there's like a little part of me that wants to reach out to Chris Hedges and just ask him very plainly, what is human nature? What is this human nature that you're talking about? And to have a more serious conversation with somebody who I take seriously. Like, I don't necessarily, I think that Hedges is coming to this question in an honest way. And because I tend to view our environment as the most important part of how humanity operates and what we do, and how we think and how we act, that our environment has a huge, overwhelming impact on what we can achieve and what we can do and where we can go. And that we, as in this capitalist world, put so much emphasis on the individual. And I think to myself, the power of the individual is nowhere near as important as the structure of your society and the structure of your system. And yeah, so I would love to talk to Hedges about that subject in particular, because I have found that I don't really disagree with Hedges that often. Hedges is one of those guys that like I've always followed, and I have a great, I have an enormous amount of respect for Chris Hedges. But this was the one time that I was like, oh, well, what's human nature? What is that? I don't think I even know what that is. Do you know what I mean? Like, for all of this talk about, like, that's human nature and humans do this, and I'm like, okay, but what are you even talking about? Human nature. Like, I know that there are, like, animals have a nature, you know? Like, when I lift my pug up, do you know what he does? Do you know what he does every single time I lift him up? He goes like this. Every single time. He waves his paws in the air like he's swimming. Right? And it's got to be that it's in his nature. Like, nobody taught him to do that. It's just part of the nature of what it is to be a pug. That when you are weightless, that you must be swimming. And so when he's picked up and made weightless, he just immediately and innately starts swimming. Even though he's not in water, he's achieving nothing. And in fact, it's actually a detriment. It causes a lot of problems when I try to lift him up. And so animals do have a nature. Like, a beaver will build a dam. It doesn't need to be taught how to do that. It just will do that. It's within its nature. And so my question, I suppose, is, what is human nature? How do humans act? And are humans... because humans are capable of acting in many different ways. Is it just that we respond to our environment and then we act upon those environmental stimuli? Or is there something more innate, something deeper? Nah, XD, he's definitely not trying to reach for something. All right. We've reached the end of this one, guys. Always remember, each and every one of you is a quantum being, walking around in quantum energy. These billionaires are spending hundreds of billions of dollars in the hopes you'll never realize it. You'll just stay the good little commodity they need you to be. Rebel. Revolt. Repent. Good luck. We're going to need it.